of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, September 9th, 2019. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, reporter Christopher Leonard on his book, Kochland, The Secret History of Koch Industries and Corporate Power in America. Also on the program today, Trump invited the Taliban to Camp David in a failed, rushed peace deal gambit. Betsy DeVos unveils new rules to protect fraudulent for-profit colleges. Democrats to launch a broader corruption investigation into the Trump administration as formalization of impeachment inquiry begins. All this as Congress returns and face a government shutdown within 3 weeks. The Air Force is now probing a rash of Trump resort overnight stays by Air Force personnel. And a big special election in North Carolina tomorrow. Can the Democrats steal a heavily Republican seat? Donald Trump headed down there to make sure that doesn't happen. We'll see if that backfires. And on the eve of the Democratic debate, Joe Biden, to the extent that he can, hears footsteps. The MIT Media Lab, rocked by Jeffrey Epstein controversy.
You know what Joe Ito, the director of the Media Lab, tweeted in 2008?
The former one.
The former one.
Yeah.
He tweeted, "Don't take money from a-holes."
Right, there you go. He either had a real trouble with assessments of a-holes or that he had a change of heart. Republican gerrymander godfather, turns out, used race-based analysis in his work for North Carolina, among other places. And we wondered why the Republicans weren't going to pursue that ruling last week. Now we know, ladies and gentlemen. And lastly, well, not lastly, and the Department of Justice is weaponized in the automaker investigation. And you've heard of disaster capitalism. Now we have disaster fascism, as we refuse to take in refugees from Bahamas. All this and more on today's program. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Thanks for joining us. Jamie is out today. We'll probably be back tomorrow. And everybody else is here with bells on. Another week. Congress is back. We are officially in the political season, as it were. We've got a big Democratic debate tonight. Or not tonight, this week, I should say. We have a big Democratic Republican race in North Carolina. The North Carolina race is really one of those things that's just going to give us, it doesn't mean much in practice. Why people are looking to it is because it's an indication of just how dramatic Donald Trump's bleeding is. North Carolina, too, is about a week away now, maybe a week and a half away from a deadline which was imposed upon them by a superior court to redraw their districts. And Republicans are not contesting this. I would argue it's probably because of these revelations that they must have had a heads up about by the guy who had drawn the maps for them. This is the famous guy who we talked about him a lot in the context of the census question. This guy Hofeller, who apparently, and now these documents are out, would give lessons to state legislatures on how to redraw maps using his data, and literally told them, never, ever use email. No one can see this stuff. And apparently he thought he was going to live forever and that his estranged daughter would not comb through his things and give up the ghost and reveal all of this in literally gigabytes of documents that she found. So a fascinating turn of events, and we'll see. It's going to have broader implications. It could have implications at the Supreme Court, although I imagine they're not going to revisit these cases. Remember, the Supreme Court will weigh in on gerrymanders that are racially based, but they won't. They say they can't. They don't know how to do it on a partisan basis. Now, state courts have shown they can do it on a partisan basis. But if it comes out that all of the contested districts that we've been talking about for years in these cases were undergirded by a racial analysis, it's going to have some broader implications. And to a certain extent, it's hard to imagine they couldn't. When you think about the states that we're talking about, and you think about the fact, that's simply a fact, there's one party in America that is all white, that is based around an identity of whiteness. That is the Republican Party. That's simply a fact. They talk about identity politics. The reason why they don't have to talk about identity politics, they only have one identity. The Democratic Party is made up of white people and black people and Latino people and Asian people. And if you're going to try and figure out how to give Republicans the advantage in many of these states, and you want to maximize it, chances are you're probably using race as a factor. And that's certainly what this guy did. So that's a big deal. This race in North Carolina, the debate coming up. There's data showing that Biden, or at least stories that we're hearing that, even in Bidenville, people are a little worried. Do not think that his lead is terribly durable. I think if you look at some of the stuff coming out about Warren that you see, whether it moves you or not, I think a lot of that's coming from the Biden camp. Ed Rendell going and saying that I had Elizabeth Warren at a fundraiser a year ago. She had no problem with the big money that we have now. She only has a problem with it now. Two different ways of looking at that. One is she was doing big money a year ago. The other is she's no longer doing big money. So, but nevertheless, Ed Rendell is not out there fighting for anybody but Joe Biden. Part of that old man, white guy club that wants to reach those people in the suburbs. But is this just a picture of Hoffa? Yeah. All right. Well, let's, since we're talking about odious people, What do you do if you can't rerun for mayor because you participated in you've crapped all over your citizenry in many respects. You have participated, possibly. People seem to think he did. I don't know how he couldn't have, but it's possible, I guess, that he was completely hoodwinked by everything that went down with the Laquan McDonald case. And if you were the guy who said, F the left, let's destroy all the outside agitation during the Obama administration. If you were the weak-kneed guy in the Obama administration, right? Like if they look around the room, they're like, who's the first guy to retreat from taking any advantage of the destruction that George W. Bush left in his wake? The first guy to retreat, it was this beautifully tanned and coiffed jackass.
The risk you said, which is appropriate and it measures up, is
I should tell people, because that's probably not in his official title. Rahm Emanuel, folks. Here he is.
Healthcare is a single issue that Democrats have a 35-point advantage on. President Trump is trying to do everything he can to narrow that down. We've taken a position so far, and the candidates have, through the process, a few have not, on basically Medicare for all, which is we're going to eliminate 150 million people's health care, and we're going to provide health care for people that just come over the border. That is an untenable position for the general election. As you know, George, I just biked around Lake Michigan, nearly 1,000 miles, through Michigan and Wisconsin, two really important states. Nobody at a diner ran at me and said, take my health care away. Nobody. This is reckless as it relates to, and you don't have to take the position to win the primary.
I wonder how many people ran up to him at a diner and just said, hey, you're an a-hole.
Or had no idea who the hell he was, if they were lucky.
Right.
Position to win the primary, and you're basically literally hindering yourself for the general election.
But to the governor's point, I mean, there is a question about whether this comes down to electability and this return to stability that Biden is running on, or whether voters want someone like Warren who's going to shake up the whole system. And when you look at our poll, particularly, it shows that there is this boost for Biden because of the electability argument.
Yeah, first of all, there's so much with that exchange that is just sort of stunning. Now, of course, when Chris Christie is, when Rahm Emanuel is supposedly bringing up the left here on this panel, this is the conversation that you're going to get. It is impossible to find in this country, in our history, an example of a presidential candidate who came out with a proposal that was in any way unpopular and wrote it to the White House. You cannot find it in history except for the last presidential election, where just about every proposal that Donald Trump offered had a net negative perspective with polling. So just that frame itself is just absurd. And again, and this is going to be the theme that we're going to hear about, or you're going to hear about, because I'm going to keep talking about it for the next 12 months. The model that these old idiots are using, this idea that there are people out there, voters, who lean Democrat and lean Republican. And sometimes they vote Republican and sometimes they vote Democrat. That model is done. Surely you can find those people. There are some of them. But this is all about return on investment and opportunity cost. Those two dynamics. The data shows that in purple districts in 2018, where people ran towards the center as a Democrat, they lost. And the reason is because Republicans are getting record-breaking turnout. And so Democrats need to have record-breaking turnout. The way to get record-breaking Democratic turnout is not to cut against polarization, but to not worry about polarization and provide things that animate Democratic voters and lean Democratic voters. There are not voters staying home saying, I think these policies are too far to the left, at least on the Democratic side. They're just saying, does this impact me enough? And that could be material and it can be an emotional impact. But they are predisposed to everything that the Democratic base is predisposed to. They just need to know that it's actually going to impact them. It needs to impact them in some way. So when you talk about immigration, how much does it motivate the people there? We know from data that the question of immigration in the wake of the Donald Trump election, the left is far more energized by it than they were during the Obama administration. Without a doubt, it became an issue in many ways in the same way that what happened with right-wing voters, where everything became racialized. So too for the left. It's just that they now support these things in a more polarized fashion. You want to bring more people out, you hammer those things. You're not going to depress your turnout by supporting things that marginal voters don't necessarily want. They're just waiting for things that are going to push them out, that are going to motivate them to get up. And electability and shaking things up are not diametrically opposed. These are not opposites. You have to go all the way back to 2016 to see that they're not diametrically opposite. Because it turns out that the guy who was promising to shake things up won.
Incidentally, it's obviously a self-selected audience, but the greatest applause line we had after celebrating David Koch's death at our live show in Chicago was definitely roasting Rahm Emanuel.
Yes.
People, and a lot of folks in Chicago beyond that room, if you look at polls,
right,
really hate him.
Right. And which is why he is up there representing Democrats on ABC television. I mean, it's sort of fascinating. I mean, it's like sort of the Claire McCaskill.
It's the same. It's precisely the same
exact
thing.
dynamic.
30% with the voters of Chicago, 80% with ABC brass.
Right. There it is. And we could probably spend 6 months trying to delve into what creates that dynamic, but that's just the reality. Meanwhile, we have two sponsors today, both of which I use on a regular or semi-regular basis. Which one do you think I use on the regular basis, and which one do you think I use on the semi-regular basis?
Fun game.
One is a toothbrush, one is Blinkist.
Blinkist.
No, I use,
Blinkist.
well, first off, I don't know when it was. Maybe it was about 3 or 4 years ago. Just completely coincidentally, I got very, very obsessed with my dental hygiene. I just got very obsessed with it because I started becoming aware that, like, I'm not that far out from having dental issues, and I just got obsessed by it. I read about it and this and that. Turns out toothpaste, it's good for you to use for your breath, but that's not the key. The key to maintaining good dental hygiene, and this is crucial, not just for your dental health, but your entire health. There's a lot of research that's starting to suggest that, like, things start in your mouth and they end in your heart. And I started getting into the idea of an electric toothbrush, and I tried to get an electric toothbrush, but then I had to plug it in. I left it on the counter of the sink. We only had one bathroom in my house. We had multiple people in there. The thing would fall, and then it's dirty. Then I don't want to deal with it, and then it's heavy. I couldn't travel with it. And then one day, Quip becomes a sponsor. And it is an electric toothbrush that is more or less the same size as your normal toothbrush. It is beautifully styled, does not need to be charged every night. It was created by dentists and product designers to focus on what actually matters for your oral health, which is healthier habits. Like, you got to brush your teeth every day. And you got to do it when you travel, and you can't get out of the rhythm. And Quip has a built-in timer to make sure that you do it for the full 2 minutes that you're supposed to do it. Meanwhile, it has a service where it delivers you the dentist-recommended new brush head every 3 months, the new charge for your phone. It has a travel cap that doubles as a thing that you stick onto your mirror, and you can hang it right there. It's not cumbersome. It's not going to fall over the place. It doesn't matter if you have a small, thing around your sink. I've ordered a kid's quip for Saul. He's super psyched. We're going to be doing this together. Quip starts at just $25. You get the first refill at quip.com/majority. You will get it for free. This is a simple way to support the program and your dental hygiene. Go to getquip.com/majority to get your first refill free. That's getquip, QUIP.com/majority to get your first refill free. And folks, I'm not going to lie to you. I don't have time to read a lot of the self-help books I want to learn terms like return on investment and 80-20 dynamics.
80-20 dynamics.
Exactly.
Love it.
Exactly.
Stoked.
And if you are like me and don't feel like you have the time to read all the books that are on your list, well, Blinkist is an app that has made your life a little bit easier. It compiles the key takeaways from thousands of nonfiction books. Everything you need to know is condensed into 15 minutes that you can either read or listen to on the app. It's unique. It works on your phone. It works on your tablet. It works on your web browser. You'll find everything from health and self-help titles to history and business books included in Blinkist library. You can, check out the 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. That's my favorite. That's basically what I'm trying to do. Trying to get there. I can't, obviously we do 2.5-hour show every day, but I'm going through, I'm listening to like the 7 habits. I'll be honest with you. In a million years, I would never pick up the 7 highly effective habits of effective people. I would never do it.
I believe you.
But you know what? 15 minutes to listen to it? All right.
Sure.
If I walk away one effective
Let's see
habit.
what you have to say, Steve.
Exactly.
Come on, Mr. Covey. Hit me with motivation.
The fire and fury. You want the key takeaways about how insane the Trump White House is? Boom. There's a lot of stuff like that. With Blinkist, you get unlimited access to read or listen to a massive library of condensed nonfiction books. You get all the books you want, one low price. Right now, Blinkist has a special offer for Majority Report listeners. Go to Blinkist, BLINKIST.com/majority to start your 7-day free trial. That's Blinkist.com/majority. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I'm going to be talking to Christopher Leonard. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. On the phone, it's a pleasure to welcome to the program business reporter and author of Kochland, The Secret History of Koch Industries and Corporate Power in America, Christopher Leonard. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
The book is gotten wild reviews, and Jane Mayer, who wrote a book about the dark money and the Koch brothers, says that if there was any question as to the role of the Koch brothers in the climate denial movement in this country, that your book basically puts it to rest, which is pretty amazing praise from someone who spent so much time working on the Koch brothers. I want to get to that, but let's just start with, and obviously it's we recently lost one of the Koch brothers. We will get to that as well. Obviously, David Koch has passed away. But let's just start with the title. It's a Kochland. It's a double entendre of sorts. Do tell.
That's exactly right. Okay, so first of all, Kochland describes this institution really well and in really surprising ways. Quickly, this company has been led by one person for over 50 years. Charles Koch has been CEO of this institution since 1967, when Lyndon Johnson was president. I don't know of any organization in private sector that has had one leader for that long. Charles Koch has a very particular philosophy about how to structure corporations and, frankly, how to structure all of American society. And he teaches all of his employees this philosophy called market-based management. And it's no exaggeration. People who work for Koch speak their own language. They have their own vocabulary. They have their own whole way of seeing the world. So that's why it's Kochland. But the reason I wrote the book and the reason I was attracted to this is that this one company helps us understand so much about what's going on in America today, economically and politically. The reason is that Koch Industries, this company, it's embedded in our daily life. This is a massive company with annual sales bigger than that of Facebook, Goldman Sachs, and U.S. Steel combined. And it specializes in these businesses that you need to survive: fuel, fertilizer, clothing material, building material, the sensors in our phones and computers. Koch makes all of these things. And so when you write about Koch, you really are writing about the entire spectrum of the American economic experience, from blue-collar manufacturing workers to high-finance derivative traders to private equity deal makers. It's all there in this one institution.
And we should say that I guess the argument is it's not just that from a product standpoint they have embedded themselves in within American life, but they obviously have in a political sense. I've been talking about the Koch brothers probably for 15 years, and it's sort of fascinating because on some level they've been siloed, but they have more money than Gates. They have more. They do more business, like you say, than all these other companies combined. They're so massive, yet in some ways they've always been sort of like it's almost like when I talk about Bill Gates in the context of education, right? It's not even remotely controversial, the impact that Bill Gates, the Gates Foundation, had on education policy for 10 years in this country. But yet it has been, and your book is part of changing this, I think. But this sort of notion of to talk about the Koch brothers and their influence is sort of like is marginal and almost almost conspiracy theory laden. But the fact of the matter is, there's no entity that has a greater single influence probably on our country.
Well, there are a couple things going on here, and I agree with you totally. And first of all, this story of Koch is very reflective of what's going on. They are there. Okay, you talk about politically. Let's get to that. One of the big things I wanted to talk about in this book is corporate power and corporate influence over our public policy, literally our laws and our public life. Corporations have more power today in America than they've had in 100 years, since the Gilded Age, the robber baron era. And so in so many important ways, we are back there again. And Koch Industries is the poster child of this. But it's also a driver of it, as you say. Yes, they reflect these big trends in corporate influence, but they drive them as well. Charles Koch has built a political influence machine that is unrivaled by any in corporate America. And I say that sincerely. And I'm a business reporter, but you look at Walmart, General Electric, Lockheed Martin, they all lobby. They've got big lobbying shops. Charles Koch's built something totally different. It's like this 360-degree political influence machine that has, at its heart, one of the biggest registered lobbying operations in America. But then you couple with that a donor network that Charles Koch put together that raises more money in some election cycles than an actual political party does. Then you've got this constellation of Koch-funded think tanks, a kind of mainstream Charles Koch's very libertarian anti-government ideas. And finally, one of the pieces that really sets it apart is this nationwide activist group called Americans for Prosperity that is Koch-built and Koch-controlled. It's in almost all 50 states, I believe. And that's where you get people knocking on doors. Americans for Prosperity will fill charter buses full of angry voters and deliver them right to the doorstep of the lawmakers that Koch's lobbying shop has targeted to be pressured. So taken together, you see a corporate influence machine that is just really powerful. And when Koch sets that thing against issues it cares about, it truly does win a majority of the time. It gets its policy preferences on climate change regulation, taxes, environmental regulation, you name it.
Can we just add to that too? And I haven't seen as much reported about this in a couple of years, but they basically have a more robust national political operation than the Republican Party. Like literally in terms of like the voter files that they maintain. Is that still operative? We just don't hear about it as much, but this, their ability to say, all the assets you need to run as a Republican, we provide that for you better than the Republican Party does.
Without question. Now, one thing we need to get to, there's no question the Republican Party is drifting from the libertarian free market Koch vision because of Trump, okay? But you are exactly right that Koch has built this nationwide infrastructure that rivals and at times surpasses the actual Republican parties. And, okay, here's what's fascinating to me. As you know, I'm really fascinated with the corporation itself. The most mind-blowing element of this whole corporate empire is the financial trading desks. Koch has built a global network of commodities trading desks that rivals anything on Wall Street. Why am I talking about that right now? Because the way Koch trades commodities has informed the way it affects our politics. These commodities traders are deep analysts who suck in tons of information, and they know the system, okay? When these commodities traders are betting on oil, they're betting on like the nuts and bolts mechanics, that the price of oil at the Gulf Coast is going to go up against the price of oil in the Northeast. Really complicated stuff. Koch approaches politics in the same way. It has built a map of American political power that's like a map of a big pipeline network, if you will. They're looking at state legislatures. They're looking at the court system. They're looking at the United States Congress. They're looking at the administrative agencies like OSHA, EPA. They're down there in the actual pipes where lawmaking is happening, where legislation is happening, and that's where Koch is influencing things. So yeah, they've built a nationwide effort that really rivals any political parties.
All right, let's just go back for a bit and step back and look at the way that the company grew, starting with Fred Koch, who famously, I guess made his first big cash working with the Nazis and the Soviets. I mean, he was very, willing to do business, Fred Koch was.
Yes, and I got, so Fred Koch, the story he tells his family is he went over and did business with Stalin and after doing it for a while realized the horrors of communism and came back home and tried to fight communism. But this guy, Fred Koch, who started this company, was a millionaire, industrialist, real driving personality, and a hardcore right-wing conservative. Fred Koch was one of the co-founders of the John Birch Society, which was this secretive right-wing group that literally believed the federal government had been infiltrated by communists and that these New Deal programs Americans kind of relied on were sort of a Trojan horse for communist tyranny. And so I think what Fred Koch imparted to his four sons was a view that politics and economics are not separate things. They're the same strand of DNA intertwined with each other. And that's why you see Charles Koch, who's Fred's son that eventually took over the corporate empire and CEO today. Charles Koch, from the beginning, has been very active in politics because he understands that public policy in Washington really affects how economics and corporations work in a very fundamental way, which is why he's been so focused on corporate lobbying. So I think Fred Koch passed on to his sons a very anti-government point of view that truly, I mean, Charles Koch, you look at the memos involved in his think tanks and the speeches he gives, there's a not just a skepticism of government, but a disdain and a true loathing of government programs, which they consider to always create more problems than they solve.
One of the things that as I look at this, and I want to get through, I want to talk about their role in climate, in the Tea Party, and cap and trade, and a couple of the other examples that you use, Pine Bend in Minnesota. But this dynamic, I mean, one of the things that I've understood in terms of what came from Mount Pelerin, which was sort of the nascent beginnings of a libertarian philosophy, was that, in fact, it wasn't just simply about the free market. It was about controlling the government apparatus to set up specific players in the industry. I mean, because, and as I've experienced it, through the years and seeing sort of the political end of this stuff, the idea is that government shouldn't pick winners and losers. But everything the Koch brothers does in terms of the way they interact with government is about making sure that they get picked the winner. Is that tension? I mean, do you see that tension in your reporting?
So, I mean, that tension is everywhere. When you get down to the real deal, the business, how Koch makes their fortune, the politics breaks apart immediately. And my brain is racing with examples right now. First of all, I would like to say that Koch and other companies really celebrate the fracking revolution. Hydraulic fracturing that has unleashed all these crude oil and natural gas supplies, seen as sort of the savior of the free market. Fracking was created by the United States federal government. Fracking was a ward of the state for decades that was kept alive through massive tax subsidies. The government did the basic research. There were public-private partnerships at universities that figured out how to do fracking, and it was the private people that kind of came in at the end and commercialized it. So talk about picking winners and losers. Fracking only exists because of the U.S. taxpayer. But when taxpayers want to subsidize solar, wind, or other renewable energies, now it's crony capitalism. But the other example that comes to my mind is that Koch's bread and butter for decades has been oil refining, okay? And that business is so deeply enmeshed with the government, with subsidies, that there's no disentangling it. And I want to point out that oil refining is tremendously anti-competitive today. And one of the reasons, strangely enough, is the Clean Air Act. The United States passed this clean air regulation back in the 70s, and we have not built a new oil refinery in the country since that time because the existing oil refineries, and this is all proven in the book, the existing oil refineries gamed the system. They gamed the regulatory system so that they could stay in business and basically block any new entrants through clean air regulations. What I'm saying is Koch's business benefits from government subsidies, government regulations, believe it or not, and the company wins because it is the entrenched status quo player in a lot of these businesses. So yes, I mean, it's not even like hypocritical. When you get down to the ground level, you just see that this is a firm operating deeply enmeshed with government programs all the time.
Well, how do they, I mean, to the extent that I know that you sat down with Charles, I think, to the extent that, I mean, how do they respond to that? Like, I mean, how do they respond to that notion of, because they've explicitly said, government should not be supporting solar energy, and government should not be, supporting wind energy. They should live or die in the marketplace. And I would add, not only did the U.S. government essentially build fracking, but for a long time, and maybe it still exists, statutorily, things like, you don't have to reveal what's in your fracking fluid. So folks have to sort of randomly test for stuff to see if their drinking water contains, chemicals that shouldn't be there, which is a lot harder than people, I think, probably imagine. But how do they respond to that? That tension is not really... It's only tension insofar as there's a pretense to this, right? I mean, it's not tense if you just say like, we go out and pretend like we don't want government influence and stuff because it's all working just for us.
Here's how I would answer that. Here's how I think they respond. I put basically that question to Philip Ellender, the top lobbyist at Koch Industries. I was sitting interviewing him in their lobbying office a block from the White House in D.C. What he says to me is, Chris, we don't have to be happy with the game, but we're going to play by the rules of the game. So if they're going to give us subsidies, we're going to take the subsidies, because if we didn't, that would be like playing basketball and not taking 3 points because you disagree with the 3-point rule. We're not going to do that. Well, okay, so there's an answer for you from Koch Industries. It does reflect the advantages of being the incumbent, and I can't emphasize enough, when I look out at the political landscape, you see this bitter dispute between the blue team and the red team, the Democrats and the Republicans. I mean, no holds barred, bitter dispute during the Obama era, particularly now during Trump, that leaves the government essentially handicapped, can't do anything. Well, in an environment where the government can't do anything, the entities that win every day are the entrenched incumbent players, the biggest of the big corporations that benefit from the status quo, and that's Koch. So Koch can get up and legitimately say we are opposed to subsidies. Don't give subsidies to ethanol. Don't give subsidies to wind power. What they just don't have to bring up is the massive programs underlying their existing business as it exists today. So you can just sort of let that stuff go and continue to benefit from it. That's sort of how I think it works today.
Did their perspective evolve as because they weren't, 30 years ago, or were they? Were they in that similarly situated?
They were, I think. From the very beginning in the 60s, oil refining, oil trading, oil processing, the fossil fuels business has been the bedrock of this company. Now, they've diversified dramatically. They own Georgia Pacific. They're the third biggest nitrogen fertilizer company on planet Earth. They've grown a lot. And in fact, we can get into this, but I describe them as like a giant private equity firm now. They're just a big pool of cash looking to invest itself constantly to earn profits. But you can't deny at the heart of it is the fossil fuel business, and then more broadly, these really complex, really expensive businesses that are at the foundation of modern civilization. Fuel, fertilizer, clothing material, building material, the sensors and electronics. Koch specializes in those kinds of business, and they have from the beginning. And also, I would say from the beginning, Charles Koch has had his very firm anti-government views that he's been pushing for. And it illustrates itself in get the government out of our business, fewer regulations, lower taxes, no regulations on greenhouse gas emissions, et cetera. That's how it tends to exhibit itself.
All right, so let's talk about this dynamic of the company being private, because there was opportunities for them to go public, to make a big sort of payout early on, and then presumably follow the way that it, and they didn't, and that allowed them what exactly?
Well, so it's very important. The book opens in 1981 when these bankers from Morgan Stanley come to Wichita and they try to convince Charles Koch to go public, which was conventional wisdom. Go public, sell shares on Wall Street, make a lot of money. Charles Koch turned them down flat, turned down a $23 million payday that he would have gotten. And, today that's like $60 million. Staying private did a lot of key things. Again, Charles Koch has had a very specific vision of how to run this company and, frankly, how to run the country from the very beginning. And by staying private, he did a few important things. The first is that he is not beholden to outside shareholders. So Charles Koch can control the company and make all the key decisions, as he does. But secondly, he's not enslaved to these short-term incentives that most public companies are. I mean, I've seen this. I've covered public companies for decades, and they're obsessed with the next 3 months. What's the next quarterly earnings going to be? Charles Koch doesn't have to worry about that. The company and the people who run it is thinking about the world in a time frame of 2, 5, even 10 years out. I mean, that's the chess game they're playing. It's measured in years and decades. They don't care about quarters. And, you know, interestingly, when he decided not to go public, I got the memo that these bankers wrote when they got back home. And Charles Koch told them, if we go public, people are going to figure out how much money our commodities traders make. And if they figure out how much money we're making, they're going to stop trading with us. That, to me, illuminates why this company is so secretive. Their whole strategy is to simply know more about the world than anybody else and to trade off that knowledge and to gain. And when that's your line of work, you don't want other people to know what you know or know what you're about to do. And that's one of the big reasons they're so secretive.
And I will say that there is a sort of a lesson there for what ails much of corporate America, at least, or one element of it is that short-term thinking, right? Like, because the Koch brothers were so intimately tied to the long-term success of their company that they were not making decisions that most CEOs would, who are simply tied to their own compensation package, which is tied to stock options, which is a function of short-term profit margins that could come in simply by cutting workers.
No doubt about it. And this book, if anything, it's a case study in long-term strategic thinking. And I think long-term strategic thinking is actually in desperately short supply today. So let's, whether you agree with the Koch brothers or not, whether you hate their business or love their business, it is instructive to watch how they think and to watch what they've done over the decades. And I could walk through a million examples. I'll just give you two. I mean, in 2003, these fertilizer plants had gone belly up in the Midwest, big plants that were losing millions of dollars a year. Nobody wanted to buy them. Koch quietly swooped in, bought these things at bankruptcy option, because Charles Koch knew people were still going to eat, they were still going to need fertilizer, energy markets were going to stabilize and change. He was playing a game on a level of years, snapped these things up for pennies on a dollar. Now they're one of the most profitable pillars of the company. The second thing I want to say is that this strategy, this approach, applies equally to politics. I got a copy of a speech that Charles Koch gave in 1974, where he lays out a political playbook of how he wants to make America more libertarian. And it is really stunning the level of patience and discipline that Koch used over decades and stuck with that playbook. I mean, that was the blueprint that they still enforce today. It wasn't just we're going to hire a bunch of lobbyists. It was we're going to fund thinkers, universities. We're going to use litigation. We're going to use corporate lobbying, on and on. And they stuck with the plan. So it really is an example of long-term strategy.
I would add, in terms of that fertilizer thing, I would imagine the irony is that fertilizer obviously becomes far more essential, not maybe far more, but significantly more essential in an era of climate change, where growing conditions are that much more difficult across the board. And they certainly have done their part to slow down, to stop, to put off progress in dealing with climate change. Talk about, I started by saying that Jane Mayer said that your book basically lays to rest any, sort of doubt as to the incredibly outsized role the Koch brothers have played in creating the climate science denial movement. I mean, I don't know how else you refer to that, but
well, I think that's exactly how you refer to it. Yeah.
Well, walk us through that. How did they do that, and when?
Yeah, and let me tell you why I'm even reporting on it. I wanted to know how Koch Lobbies. I'm super interested in the whole topic of how do corporations win in Washington. It's no doubt about it. They are winning more often than they're losing today, and they're writing our public policy. So I wanted to know, what does Koch do? How do they do it? What are they doing right? Why are they so powerful in Washington? And when I started interviewing these lobbyists at the company and the political operatives, they pointed me in one direction. I remember asking this guy, what was important to you? What did you lobby on? What woke you up in the morning? And the answer to that question was carbon. The issue of carbon was of paramount importance to Koch's political machine. What they're saying is that, Koch as a fossil fuels maker is just deeply enmeshed with the fossil fuel system, which is categorically putting gigatons of greenhouse gas emissions into the sky every year for free. It's not considered a pollutant, really. So if you put a price on those emissions, as many people around the world want to do, because we realize, just the costs of doing this are going to be enormous. I know that seems like stating the obvious, but I just can't overemphasize it enough. But Koch realized really decades ago that if we limit greenhouse gas emissions, it's going to put a cap on the future of the fossil fuels business. And that is going to cost Koch at least billions of dollars. I mean, think about the amount of money they have sunk into these enormous refineries, pipeline networks, global energy trading systems. If we put a cap on carbon, the value of all those things decline. And so I'm sorry to go on so long about this, but how did they do it? I mean, they employed that 360-degree Koch political machine I've kind of referred to here. They funded think tank studies that made it look like it would be absolutely awful if we regulated greenhouse gas emissions. They hired their lobbyists to figure out who the vulnerable lawmakers were. When the Tea Party came along in 2010, Koch was there as a concierge, basically, to the Tea Party. They helped the Tea Party organize events. They chartered buses to take the Tea Party members for free from wherever they lived to Washington, D.C. And as they did that, Koch injected its own rhetoric and its own concerns into the Tea Party. When it would host a big rally, the people would get up on stage and tell the crowd, hey, if we regulate greenhouse gas emissions, that's the first face of government tyranny. This is what Thomas Jefferson warned us against, is that if you regulate greenhouse gas emissions, the government is going to turn socialist. So they harnessed that populist energy and helped derail a bill that was frankly a Republican bill, a conservative bill that involved trading, and they derailed it in 2010.
And I imagine too that they're like so much of like when I think of, because this has come back in the news, the light bulb controversy. It's hard for me to express to younger people in my office, like the idea that, and this came up under Bush actually, the idea that we would legislate as to, incandescent light bulbs as constructed now are going to be, legislated out of existence was literally like, I don't know, we were sucking the personalities out of people out of the back of their heads, and we were going to drain them of all their bodily fluids. And I imagine on some level, like the Koch brothers understood that if we fund that stuff, that is just upstream from all the other stuff.
Yes. And I must emphasize what a threat that is to the fossil fuels business. It is pretty remarkable. 10 years ago, there's a lot of conversation about quote-unquote peak supply of oil. Oh, my God, we're going to run out of oil. There'll be all these. Okay. The threat now, and this is real, you talk to these oil industry investors and analysts, it's peak demand. They realize that the alternatives are getting cheaper, the costs of greenhouse gases are becoming more apparent, and so we might shift, and demand for oil will drop. That is a catastrophic outcome for these big fossil fuels companies. And yes, they do realize that these things are going to chip away at the armor of, frankly, the massive monopoly the fossil fuels have over the energy system.
Interesting. Let's just talk about a little bit of the work that they have done in attacking and demonizing unions. And we should also say that, I mean, it's interesting because you give them, they apparently were pioneers in this, and I want to start with this, with the way they track their warehouse employees. Because I interviewed a woman who had spent some time working at Amazon and had talked about this, that happens there, that they the tracking of employees at literally every 60 seconds they have to clock into the thing. That many of that dynamic was in many ways pioneered by the Koch brothers.
The Koch brothers practiced this to the hilt, and I am so grateful you brought this up. It's a huge part of the story that surprised me with how important it is. And gosh, you look at the history of it. You know, back when Charles Koch took over his company, 33% of Americans in the private sector workforce were in a labor union. That had an enormous effect on the entire economy, because even non-union shops, the owners were scared that the workers would unionize. This was the era in America that stands apart as the time when we had economic growth, people gained. You know, we're ending now about a decade of economic expansion, and the vast majority of Americans have not even advanced one bit economically, okay? They're taking on debt. Their wages haven't significantly increased. That's not how things were. The book shows labor unions had their problems. We got to be real honest about that. They used intimidation. They used violence. There was corruption. Okay, that's real. But let's look at what life is like today. You know, and I spent years reporting on Koch's factories where these labor unions are being beaten back and taken apart. You brought up a perfect example. Without the labor unions being powerful, Koch dictates what the work life is like. And these employees at this warehouse, in particular in Portland, spend 10 hours a day being told what to do by the minute by the software system. But even worse, a few years ago, Koch would publicly post the employees' performance as tracked by the software system. And so it literally, you know, divided and conquered the workforce by making them compete against each other every week. And the low performers on that chart would be disciplined or fired. So they're systematically dividing workers against each other. And I got the labor union contracts for these employees going back to the 70s, and it shows they're earning less money today than they did in the 1980s when you adjust for inflation. So they're working harder, they're getting paid less, and that's really the story of the American worker today. And Koch reflects that, and it also drives that. I mean, they've been working across the country to dismantle and disempower labor unions for decades, and it's been working.
So David has died recently. Mm-hmm. He was you write of him as being the more public of the billionaires. Charles is the one who stayed back in Kansas, I guess it was, and continues to get up early and work the grind. But he is in his 80s, if I'm not mistaken. What happens to the business and to, I guess, it's because you talk about how at one point they had suffered a lot of fines from the EPA because they were dumping stuff and they didn't care, and then they realized, like, this is too expensive. We're better off spending the money up front and changing society so that we don't get fines, because we now have tailored the regulatory state to just suit the way that we do business. What happens to this machine, both to the extent that one can delineate between the political and corporate, which it seems like one really can't. But what happens to this machine after Charles dies, let's say?
And I think you're right. You cannot delineate. The politics and the business are tied up together. And look, this is unsatisfying, but as a reporter, I just have to tell you, I don't know. It is a huge open question mark what happens when Charles Koch leaves. He's in his early 80s. He, as you've mentioned, I firmly believe Charles Koch is the center of this story. I mean, he drove this organization. David Koch, while he was more public, was more of a silent partner. Charles Koch is a meticulous planner. I mean, this is a guy with 3 engineering graduate degrees from MIT. He doesn't leave stuff to chance. So if anybody's thinking hard about the future of this organization, it's Charles Koch. The end of the book has a chapter about Charles Koch's son, Chase, who's been really cultivated to take over the company and the political network, I believe, since he was a kid, since he was 7. Furthermore, I think Charles Koch would argue that he's basically institutionalized his view inside the corporation through this very detailed philosophy he has called market-based management, which is taught to every single Koch employee when they start for days, and I've never seen anything like it. I mean, Koch employees literally speak their own vocabulary that has a special meaning to them. It's one of the reasons I call the book Kochland. It's like its own little world. So Charles Koch would say that even when he steps away, his instincts and his strategies have been institutionally baked into this organization. Now, I just have to be honest, it's an open question. Is Chase Koch going to be different from his dad? Is the company going to drift without this leader at the helm? Only time will tell, but it is absolutely guaranteed that 5 years from now, 10 years from now, this institution is going to be just as large and just as influential as it is today. It's just so big. It's so embedded in our economic and political system. It's not going away.
The book is Kochland, The Secret History of Koch Industries and Corporate Power in America. Christopher Leonard, thanks so much for your time today. Really interesting stuff.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, folks. There you have it. I don't know. I maybe it's wishful thinking, but I loved the idea of they always think it's embedded in their institution. They always think it's going to outlive them. And then the sands of time wipe it all away. One can only hope.
Yeah.
People start working on that Chaz guy right now. Chaz. I'm sure he calls himself Chaz. I'm almost sure of it.
I'm worried about Wyatt.
Wait, is he one of the Koch?
He's a son. Yeah.
He's the maker of the shirt you should have been wearing.
Yeah, no,
during that interview.
I know I should have been wearing that one.
Oh, yeah, damn.
Damn it. I'm looking at it right now.
Actually, especially after that interview, I feel like Wyatt, we should just cut some slack.
Right.
Oh, we gotta nip
That's
that
just
in the
best
bud.
case.
Moron in Florida
If the entire family basically said, I'm just going to follow my passion. One guy's like, I have a vision for baked goods. Another guy have a vision for a clothing line. Another guy like, I'm gonna raise Arabian horses or something.
Oh no!
Let's help British
Nothing
Empire.
that involves the care of a living being.
Well, that's probably true.
If you look at the production value on those shirts, let's stick to like pottery.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Maybe. How about a nursery? High-end nursery.
Ooh, no. Bad deal. Not a good deal.
Folks, just a reminder, this program relies on your support. And you can support this program by becoming a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, we give you extra content every day. Did we release the Hannity thing?
No, me and Brendan have something to clear up then, I guess.
No comment.
We're going to. We're just going to drop it up. We'll drop it on the feed today.
Yeah, we can easily do
It'll be in the members feed.
We'll see.
But not only do you get deep archives, deep archive of the week, we'll do that. And we're going to start doing that this week.
In a certain sense.
Right.
Just hang tight.
But you also get extra content every day. JoinTheMajorityReport.com. Also, don't forget JustCoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code Majority, get 10% off of all the coffee blends. Get the Majority Report blend. It's a nice cup of joe, as it were. Also, AM Quickie every morning. People are loving it. Actually, I got honked at by somebody in a car today.
Wow.
They said, Sam, big fan.
Love the Quickie.
They didn't say, I love the Quickie.
I was going to say,
Quicky's so good.
I sort of felt like I heard that they were going to say
news
that.
content.
There was something
that still
about
has a point of view.
There was something about the way that they said that I thought that.
I had no idea.
It was awkward. It was on Flatbush. And the guy was going up. I was walking down the downside, and I'm walking next to some lady, and the guy starts yelling at me, and she's just looking like she has no idea what's going on.
And he's like excited about it starting its own new feed.
Yep.
Yeah.
When's the new feed happening? Just tell me.
Yeah. Honey, he's about to launch it on the new feed. Is that the guy that was on Sex and the City? Yes.
Yep, there it is. Also, folks, just a reminder, this episode is brought to you by Blinkist. You know, honestly, during the interview, I was going to say, like, I was going to say to the guy, I was going to say,
nobody's going to read this whole thing.
You should do like a sort of a small book on market-based management. Because that's something that I would go to Blinkist. I wouldn't read the whole book because I'm not that, but I want interested in the principles just to get a sense of how they're operating. Right. And Blinkist would be the perfect way to digest that.
Koch management.
And I just thought that was not the appropriate way to approach that interview.
I don't think so.
My understanding of market-based management is kind of like don't be diligent in inspecting pipelines.
Right.
Right. Be very diligent, and when your employees use the bathroom.
That's the exactly. That is sort of like the extension of Michael's business theory, which is don't get good at a job you don't want to do. The Blinkist app.
Oh, that's smart. It's been very effective.
It has.
Patreon.com/TMBS, baby.
The Blinkist app takes the key takeaways from thousands of best-selling nonfiction books and condenses them down just to 15 minutes for you to read or listen to. 10 million people. 10 million are using Blinkist right now, right this moment.
So good.
As a massive and growing library, from self-help and business to health and history books. That's true. I don't even know if they had history books when I started Blinkisting. Coined. Trademark.
Civil War.
Right now, you can get 25% off your first year at Blinkist. 25% off your first year? At Blinkist.com/majority. Check it out. Blinkist.com/majority. Michael.
Yes.
Tomorrow's
indeed.
Tuesday.
Tomorrow's Tuesday. Kianga Amata Taylor joins us. We're talking about the tension and potential really reinventing the conversation between reform and revolution, how that fits into the Bernie Sanders campaign. And we also might be touching on the Kambiki Women's Collective as well, Kambiki Collective. Then Bhaskar Sunkara and Napoleon the Legend join us, both in studio. We're talking about the legacy of Robert Mugabe, throwback to Christopher Hitchens on socialism in the 1980s, and the state of the 2020 race and the coalitions the different candidates are assembling. Plus, of course, a whole bunch more than that, as always. Patreon.com/TMBS. Michael Brooks Show on YouTube, where we've just cracked our first 74,000 subscribers. Thank you.
Check out The Antifada at patreon.com. The Antifada. Matt.
Are you familiar with passenger pigeons?
Passenger pigeons.
They're sort of the East Coast version of bison in that they were hunted to extinction early on, but they're like these big, giant pigeons with like colorful necks and stuff.
What?
And they accounted for like a sixth or something crazy of North American birds in the early colonial time. They would fly in massive flocks and basically blot out the sun for multiple days and things like that. And
what? No, I hadn't heard of anything like this.
You might want to look at those.
They just
I feel like Saul should be
them.
on that. My
They
son,
just
I feel like my
slaughtered
son would be on top of that type of stuff.
It was really like biblical sort of thing, and then we massacred them all. Well, of
course.
James Fenimore Cooper's The Pioneers, that massacre is illustrated in one of the chapters where the newly appointed sheriff dusts off some old military equipment and shoots a cannon into the giant flock of them. And it's basically a book that meditates on conservationism versus commodifying the country in terms of settlement and things like that. So it's an interesting, very interesting book. And the passenger pigeon was something I learned about from it.
I had no idea. Fascinating. Check it out, folks. All right. See you. Fun half.
That's a wild.
Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous? You're a little bit upset? You're riled up?
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude.
You want to
smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
That's some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1/2. 5 8s. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agreed.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up. Ooh. Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
let's just start in with this. It is this is our country, folks. This is our country. There was a massive, I'm sure you are all aware, a massive natural disaster that took place in part of the Bahamas. Bahamas is a series of many, many islands. I don't know how many, but a lot. Some of them are completely untouched by Hurricane Dorian. Others completely wiped out. It has been the case with the Bahamas that you do not need a visa. Visa requirements, not every country is required to have a visa to come in. You need to show your passport. There may be other documents that you might need. You don't need a visa to go from America to Canada. And this is a story reported by Brian Enton. I don't know exactly who he is. He's a reporter in Miami, I guess, for WSVN. I don't know if he was actually on this boat as a reporter. I think maybe. I'm not sure. But nevertheless, he documented this trip, basically, of folks who completely lost everything in this hurricane and were headed to the United States. Maybe they have family. Probably, I would imagine, that they can stay with as they attempt to rebuild. And people are on the boat. They're getting ready. And then this is an evacuation of the island. And then this announcement on the boat is recorded.
Please proceed to disembark. Let you come into the USA. You all will have problems. So please, all passengers that don't have U.S. visa, please
So basically, what it is, it's an announcement that the U.S. is going to require a visa. Now, look, imagine how difficult it would be to get a visa under these circumstances. Everything you own has been destroyed. You have kids. Where do you stay while you're trying to get a visa? It's not like you go and you get in a Metro card, you put some cash in it, it comes out. You got to go register. You got to, there's probably a consulate. And it's a new requirement that didn't exist before this natural disaster. They don't want to allow these refugees from this hurricane to come into the country. That's it. Bottom line, that's it. And so they instituted this new requirement so late in the game that people are being kicked off the boat, the evacuation boat. This guy, Brian Enton, did a couple of interviews with people. This guy is Leonard Oliver. He has a baby in his hand. They were headed from the Bahamas to Florida. He was told he could leave the Bahamas with a Bahamian passport and a police record. Apparently they, my understanding is you can't get into Canada if you have a DUI.
Although the police will just record his Bahamian passport like normal, I guess.
Right. They just basically say like, okay, we're just acknowledging that you are who you are, or whatever, your record's clean, whatever it is. And here he is responding to the fact that he and his baby have to be kicked off this evacuation boat.
They just got a call from CBP, and CBP told them that everyone that doesn't have a U.S. visa and who's traveling on police record has to come off.
And normally you can travel, right, with police record?
Yeah, normally you can use police record by way of airplane at least, yeah.
So you have to take your baby off?
Yeah, so I have to take her off, yeah.
I mean, how do you feel?
At the last minute like this, it's kind of disappointing. It's hurtful because I'm watching my daughters cry, but yeah, it is what it is.
We have another clip from the same guy, Brian Enton, as the boat is leaving, and parents and kids now stuck on the island. Nobody understands why the rule was changed at the last minute.
I think this is terrible. I think they should allow everyone to come into the U.S. They originally said that you can come without a police record and without a visa, and now they're taking that back. That's really ridiculous. That's
How many
awful.
people do you think had to get off, did you see?
They said 130 people had to come off. 130 people had to come off the ship tonight.
And now we leave?
Now we're leaving them, and it's only like 200 people on the boat now.
Yeah, Brian Enton writes, nobody understands it.
And now it looks like they're like the CBP is blaming the ferry company and the ferry company is blaming the CBP.
Well, right, because it basically comes out. Here's CPB Florida.
Fortunately for the cruise line, for the Balearia to state that is really heartbreaking, because these people have suffered enough through what they went through, and then for the Balearia to go ahead and state that and break these people's hearts. I think they raised their expectations without fulfilling the requirements that if they had done that with us and worked with us, we would have been there to facilitate that process. However, they didn't. We would have basically made sure that everybody was properly documented and facilitated that process working with the cruise line. So why they said that, I wouldn't know, and it's really heartbreaking for them to say that to these people that have really suffered more than beyond comprehension.
Now, I'm unclear as to really what went down here, but what it sounds like is CPB did put new restrictions on, and the boat company felt like they weren't capable to how to administer it all. But this is why you put these restrictions on. I mean, people have to understand this. There are bureaucratic ways to make things harder to have happen. We see this every single time, from whether it's like the the census question, whether it's voter ID, you just create obstacles. And human beings are human beings. Companies are companies. There are certain obstacles they will not climb. There are certain obstacles they won't be able to climb. It's disgusting. The reporter wonders why. Really? Do we really got to wonder why? Why the response from CBP is like, whatever. Just have them on the boat. We'll figure it out when they get here. It's going to be a hassle. We'll figure it out on the boat. No, we're going to change our policy because this reflects our ideology here, a hostility towards refugees. Maybe we'll get a test case to see what happens if we were to get refugees from Greenland. But it's disgusting. That's who we are, folks. That's who we are. I mean,
then we get to hear the people responsible talk about how big of a shame it is.
Right. This is exactly how you do it, right? We just simply asked for one or two new things, and the people who put that in the pipeline know why they did that. It could eliminate up to 50% of the people. And it did. At least on this boat. It's disgusting. I mean, I don't know what else to say. It's just disgusting. Here's Mike Pompeo on ABC News. I mean, clearly what happened is with the whole Taliban thing. I mean, aside from the fact that like it's bizarre timing. We should have been talking to the Taliban. We should have been talking to the Taliban 15 years ago, frankly. Probably would have gotten bin Laden at that time, but they didn't want to get bin Laden, of course, because had the Bush administration successfully captured bin Laden, then there wouldn't have been the same urgency required to invade Iraq. I mean, I think that's just the case. I just don't think there was a sense of urgency about that. A lot of people, have this opinion. Not a lot of people. I don't know. Some people have this opinion that we should have been talking to the Taliban much earlier. People forget we were talking to the Taliban in the spring, in the early spring, and in the summer of 2001. Dick Cheney's Energy Task Force was over there. You can go back and Google this. There were reports at the time. Some former envoys, I think, were in these meetings, and oil executives, where the Taliban was told, I'm trying to think of what the quote was, we can carpet your country with riches or with bombs. It never, I don't know how mainstream those reports got at the time, but I remember tracking down contemporaneous, like maybe in 04, 05, interviews with people who were attributed as saying that, and they would not deny it, that they said it at the time in those meetings. And I've always postulated it's quite possible that the Taliban came back from that meeting. There was a sense of like the Americans are coming for us, and that's what created the timing for bin Laden. I'm going to strike before they strike us. Don't know. But clearly what happened here is Donald Trump wanted to get a political win. And not too dissimilar from what Bill Clinton did at the end of his term, I think in rushing peace between the Israelis and Palestinians. Donald Trump tried to do that here. It has backfired. Hopefully it doesn't ruin the deal that envoys have been working on for months, if not years, to extricate us from the longest war we've ever participated in. But here's Mike Pompeo going out and basically willing to flush all that down the toilet so that the Mad King doesn't put him in the doghouse.
And we've been making progress. We'd had a commitment from the Taliban that said that they would break with al-Qaeda publicly and permanently. We had a commitment that said that they would reduce violence and that they would, for the first time, George, you know this, you were an administration that tried to get Afghans to sit at the table together. We had a commitment that they would meet in Oslo to begin reconciliation conversation. And then the Taliban overreached. They killed an American in an effort to gain leverage at the negotiating table. And President Trump said enough.
But there have been periodic attacks throughout the talks. Why pull the plug after this one? In the past, when there have been attacks, you've said that was a reason to continue the talks.
Yeah, it's true. There have been attacks during the talks. Attacks from the Taliban on Americans and enormous attacks from American forces, putting in real pressure on the Taliban. George, we've, in just the last 10 days alone, killed over 1,000 Taliban. We have been fighting and talking in a way that America often doesn't do. It's what's driven us to be able to have the success at the negotiating table that we were beginning to have. But we finally reached a point where we were close. We'd made real progress, and then the Taliban failed to live up to a series of commitments that they had made. And when that happened, President Trump said, I'm not going to take that deal. I'm not going to work with someone that can't deliver on their commitments. Because in the end, George, you know this, a deal, an agreement is just a piece of paper. We have to actually see that change in behavior. And when we saw this activity, when we saw this action, when we
pause. Because the key point is the lie that he told in the third place. They had no commitment yet. That's the whole point. They were negotiating. They had terms, but they had not made the commitment yet. Which is why he can bust through that and brag about killing 1,000 Taliban this week and still say the president decided. No, what happened was they effed up. They made a deal with the Taliban and they did not let the Afghan government know about it. So when they were going to have this secret meeting, the Taliban was going to show up, but the Afghan government wasn't because they weren't involved in it, because they don't know what they're doing. And so they screwed it up. And so that Donald Trump needs to protect his fragile ego. I mean, I think it's this reductive. It's not like this was headline news. It's not like they report every time an American soldier gets killed in Afghanistan. Nobody pays attention to this stuff anymore. We could have probably, and we probably have, killed hundreds of civilians over the months that they've been negotiating.
Oh, we have.
This.
It's been documented that there's record levels of civilian deaths last year.
No one reports it. It's just that Donald Trump, he had his feet hurt, and he's insane. And so who knows? Maybe we get out of there. Maybe we don't at this point.
Longer than World War II.
Oh, my God.
Well, longer.
Multiple,
longer.
what, like 3-4 times?
I think, though, I just want to add, too, I mean, when he says 1,000 Taliban at this point, I don't even know exactly what that means, because I think at this point, there's a Taliban in Pakistan, which is connected but separate, and it basically could just mean like any militia group that wants occupying NATO forces to leave.
Right.
Which, I'm sorry, that is an internationally valid position. You can't have a never-ending occupation of occupying forces that, incidentally, are just relentlessly killing civilians. I also want to say, and this is complicated, but it is worth mentioning, that during the Bush administration too, there were at least factions of the Taliban that basically said, we will hand over bin Laden if you don't strike us.
Oh, yeah.
You provide us with evidence of his direct role in the attack. And that was dismissed out of hand and reported as like, oh, this is part of what, crazy terrorists they are. But those are not illegitimate requests. Don't carpet bomb our country, provide material evidence, and we'll give you the guy you want. And probably, I mean, at that point, he might have already been gone into Pakistan, frankly. But, that's another context for what happened there.
Oh, we were offered
yes,
bin Laden
by the Taliban
with very minimal conditions very early on. But no, that was not the agenda. They wanted to go to war. I mean, that was the bottom line. They wanted the war, and they got it.
And they still have it.
Yep, they still have it. We'll go to the phones in a second, but Ben Shapiro finally got around to. Should we listen to the Reagan tape first, or should we listen to?
I say we listen to Shapiro first.
Okay, so here's Ben Shapiro. How do you deal with? And I'll tell you something. It is stunning to me that it's taken this long for this tape to come out. And apparently, this is a tape that was in the Nixon library. The curator refused to release it because it dealt with the personal. It was like a personal thing. It was about personal stuff for Reagan. This is when Reagan called Richard Nixon upon seeing which African nation was it headed to the UN.
I think it was a People's Republic of China versus Taiwan sort of thing. And the Republic of China was going to be acknowledged by the UN.
Right. And so Reagan calls Nixon. But the idea that this was, well, we'll talk about that in a minute.
Does he actually play the line in this? I mean, the whole joke. Okay,
here's Ben Shapiro basically trying to sort of poo-poo it.
Yeah, it looks like he was asked, how do you respond to something like this?
And I think it's a great question. So for folks who missed it, there was a story in which somebody revealed an old tape from President Nixon's term. It was like 1973, and Governor Reagan, who was then governor of California, called up Nixon and used an ugly slur talking about African leaders. And it was a racist slur used on this phone call. And this has been used by a lot of folks on the left to suggest that Reagan was a thoroughgoing racist and therefore his policies are racist. And Enrique, I honestly think that the best way to approach these issues is with a simple recognition that human beings are human beings and are multifaceted. That some people may say ugly things behind closed doors, and some people may say dumb things, and some people may say bigoted things. But if you are going to jump to make a decision about policy on the basis of human beings are flawed and are sinful and do sinful things, well, then no one's ever going to make policy, because it turns out everybody says bad things behind closed doors. Everybody has made terrible jokes. Everybody has friends they regret having had and has said things they regret having said. And people change over time. A little forgiveness would be necessary. And if they don't believe you, then it's pretty easy to point to people on the left. And that's not a whataboutism game.
Pause it for a second. First of all, well, let's play this. But I want to remind you as you listen to this, and we'll go back to Ben's apology for that. Making policy around people's failures and shortcomings is all that policy is for, frankly. There's a reason why we need a Civil Rights Act, because of the failures of human beings to allow people of different races to maybe sit at the same lunch counter. That's one point I want to make. The second point is Ronald Reagan never apologized. Ronald Reagan never regretted saying this. He never expressed any regret from it.
No, this is really...
Thirdly, wait a second. Thirdly, nobody's saying this. Oh my God. We had no idea. We have to reevaluate Ronald Reagan. This is the guy who launched his campaign at the Neshoba County Fair in 1979, whatever it was, for the presidency, within a couple of miles of where they did a movie on this, Mississippi Burning, for you youngins, where 3 civil rights workers were killed by some local sheriffs in Mississippi. And he went and talked about states' rights, which is... I don't even know, is it code? I mean, do people even perceive it as code anymore? It was explicitly about an argument about how the locals should treat their blacks. And he went there and promoted it. I mean, this was the only thing that I think people gleaned from this was like, oh, not that we reinterpret his public policies based upon what we hear privately. It's that, oh, those racist public policies were actually reflective of his personal feelings. It's not the opposite.
Well, this is the crucial point. I mean, let's also add vetoing sanctions against South Africa. And the way it's a direct point, and It's so frustrating because I actually completely agree of a good faith version of that public culture should be much more focused on people evolving and changing and not sort of endlessly relitigating things. But this is what Ben Shapiro does in his own rebrand. And I've had to go over this for my book, and it's exhausting. He has a page on his website, which is here's a list of all the stupid things I've said. And it is all like, this is an obnoxious way of conveying. It's either something like, yes, I probably shouldn't have fallen for Chuck Hagel, like being friends with Hamas. That's a little embarrassing. Okay, sure. But all of the other things are appalling things that he's had no substantive upgrade on. It's all just like, I put it in a juvenile way 15 years ago. Not, now I do recognize that Palestinians are human beings.
Right, exactly. I just shouldn't be so vocal about saying they're not.
Precisely.
Here is Ronald Reagan, what he had to say at that time.
President Richard Nixon recorded himself talking to then California Governor Ronald Reagan in October 1971, the day after the United Nations voted to recognize the People's Republic of China. Reagan had phoned Nixon at the White House to vent his frustration at African delegates who celebrated the vote.
Last night, I tell you, to watch that thing on television, as I did, to see those monkeys from those African countries, damn them, they're still uncomfortable wearing shoes.
To see those monkeys from those African countries, damn them, they're still uncomfortable wearing shoes. Remember, what this tells us about Ronald Reagan is not that he had a whole host of racist policies. And remember, all of the your Supreme Court justice who sat upon the reversal and the destruction of the Voting Rights Act was in his civil rights division of the Justice Department. John Roberts, coming up with these ideas, was basically commissioned to develop these racist notions of how to get rid of voting protections for black people. And John Roberts says in 2007, or excuse me, whatever it was, 14 or 13, or 2010, racism's over, we can get rid of the Voting Rights Act. But he first conceived of these ideas 30 years earlier.
I also like the notion of personal conversation. You think of like, I'm having a really hard time with Nancy because her astrologer says we should have fewer date nights.
Exactly.
And that's really difficult. And incidentally, these goddamn monkeys at the United Nations voting on recognizing the People's Republic of China. I'm governor of California, so obviously talking about international relations is a personal conversation.
Right, of course. Like, I mean, if he had said, I'm sure they would have said, we're not going to release this thing where he praises the courage of the African nations coming to the UN.
I would just like to say, even though I disagree with him ideologically, Kwame Nkrumah's a fantastic leader, but please keep that off the record.
Yes,
because it's a personal conversation. Africa equals personal.
Yes.
Friends they regret having had and has said things they regret having said, and people change over time. A little forgiveness would be necessary. And if they don't believe you, then it's pretty easy to point to people on the left. And that's not a whataboutism game. That's saying it's bad when it happens on the right. It's bad when it happens on the left. But when we're talking about which policy moves the country forward, we need to, instead of looking at the people, which is a character attack, we need to look at the policy that moves the country forward. After all, we're not electing these people to be our friends or even really to be our moral guidance counselors. We're electing these people to implement policy. And I think, frankly, that's the best way to argue in favor of politicians because, let's be real, most politicians are schmucks.
Right. So there you have it. He completely ignores the public record on Ronald Reagan talking about the welfare queens and their Cadillacs.
And the young buck getting his welfare check.
Getting his welfare check. And, South Africa, we need constructive engagement. And the idea of states' rights right around the corner from where you guys had to kill those civil rights workers. I mean, and the list goes on and on. The DOJ Civil Rights Division that is plotting on how to get rid of the voting protections that have been put in place at that point for about 15 years. 15 years when you get to 1980. 15 years worth of voting protections after almost 100 years of Jim Crow laws.
Guess who took photos with Michael Jackson? Go screw yourself, Jew. Oh, whoa. I mean, the last thing was on the private.
That's personal.
That was the personal part.
I mean that by that I mean personal.
You shifty Jews on the Majority Report. That's the personal part.
Folks,
of the conversation.
You should also be aware of a podcast called The Informationer, which was basically there were two reasons why Matt works here. One was his mechanism for reading 150 books the year before he showed up, and then him telling me I have my own podcast where I take Nixon tapes and put them to music so my friends listen to them.
Here's a little taste of actually did record this conversation, but when I did this remix, the part about the monkeys that didn't like to wear shoes was not. That was released.
That was personal.
It was bleeped over.
That was the personal part.
But yeah, here's how he starts.
Hello?
Mark?
Hello? Mr. President?
Hope I didn't get you out of bed.
No, I'm Satan up, although I'm still trying to sleep on Oriental time, and it's not working very well.
Still trying to sleep on Oriental time.
Oh, that's personal. I said Oriental.
Oriental means personal. I'm still in the chopstick continent. Personal.
Personal. Calling from a 308 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, this is Kowalski from Nebraska.
Kowalski from Nebraska. How are you, sir?
Oh, not too bad. Just got back from Colorado. The Huskers lost miserably. It was depressing. Anywho, I was just calling in to say that if any of your viewers are going to be in the area for Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, a ag show's going on in my hometown of Grand Island called Husker Harvest Days. It's a pretty good time if people want to go out and just see what's up with like the ag industry. So,
Husker Harvest Days, and are you going to be out there campaigning?
Probably not. I usually go out there and I know the guy who manages the show, and we usually help him with some odds and ends stuff. So,
all right.
But I guess you might see me out there. Who knows?
All right. Well, Husker Harvest it is.
Enigma campaigning. I like
exactly.
It. Maybe I'll shake your hand,
Well,
kiss some babies, and maybe I won't.
But I would be going around. People around here are weird when it comes to campaigning, but that was all I wanted to share with. So,
all right. Appreciate the call. There it
Thanks.
is, folks. Go
right.
keep your eyes
Have a good
open
one.
for Kozlowski there. Kowalski.
Keselowski.
I'm thinking of Paul Kozlowski.
Hi. Is that a Coen Brothers movie?
Paul Kozlowski used to have a big theater in L.A. Fake theater. Oh, I don't know what I'm talking about. Calling from a 702 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam, it's Bro Flamingo from Las Vegas.
Bro Flamingo from Las Vegas. What's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing today, Sam?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Doing pretty good. I actually just want to touch upon like two things real quick. The first thing was, there was the reparations hearing a couple of, I think maybe like 2 months ago. And it didn't really there was so much going on. I didn't get a lot of media coverage. But the reason why I'm bringing it up because there was a guy, I'm sure you've seen him on MSNBC, but a guy named Jonathan Capehart.
Yeah.
And he wrote an article. He wrote an article in the Washington Post. I forgot the exact title, but I read the article. But it was something to the effect of black people don't need a check. They need an apology. And I'm reading this article, and it's just like, oh, wow. So, and the reason why this relates back to the reparations hearings, because the one thing that all these people had in common, and there's a lot of clowns there, but the one thing I didn't like was, and Ta-Nehisi Coates was there too, but I feel like I don't know, I have my own problems with Ta-Nehisi Coates, but my main problem was all of them advocated basically for, almost no economic reparations. That topic was avoided entirely. And Jonathan Capehart, maybe 2 months later, is still here advocating for, no economic reparations for black people. And, that kind of bothers me. You know what I'm saying? I was wondering if you noticed that or anybody else noticed that, because it was just, I'm not saying that should be the only thing. That's what I advocate for reparations, but there just seems to be a steady phalanx of people out there pushing the line. Oh yeah, no economic reparations. We need an apology, or government programs. Or there was even one guy named Coleman Hughes on the reparations panel. It was this guy named Coleman Hughes, and by the way, he works for Quillette, hint, hint, Quillette. So, but this guy anyway was just sitting here talking about, we're not, black people aren't victims. We don't need economic reparations. He's like, I'm from the left and everything. And it was ridiculous. It was a joke. I mean,
to be honest with you, like I haven't followed that. And I think that there's probably some people who are nervous in the context of the upcoming election to talk about it, which I think is sort of, I suppose I understand it, but I think it's sort of silly. But, the thing that I think people don't understand, broadly speaking, about reparations, I imagine all the people you're talking about do, is that this is not a new idea. This is an idea that was offered and voted on
at all
during Reconstruction, in the immediate years following the Civil War, and the ideas ranged from, I don't actually think there was a mule, but the 40 acres. There was a bill that was voted on. I think it was Johnson who vetoed it. There was an idea to provide low-cost loans because you had all of these freed slaves who had no access to capital whatsoever. There was an idea of having government-subsidized loans and backing of loans. That was also shot down. There was an attempt, I think Frederick Douglass was involved in this.
Sam, I'm on the point.
I'm
on the point something out too. I'm sorry, real quick, but I see what you're saying. I'm listening to what you're saying, but also I need to point something else out too. Besides all the racial politics, aside from that, I also saw an article from Megan McArdle. Hint, hint. You know what I'm saying? Not only was this garbage, okay? Jesus, how does this person have a job? But not only was it stupid, it was the same old tired argument of, well, how will we pay for it? You know what I'm saying? I'm hearing that too. By the way, that came up in the hearing too. How will we pay for it? I mean, it's just, I see it's the topics coming around from both sides. Now, I think the racial politics, that's being overcome because there was a poll actually on, the name is missing me, but it's one of the premier ones. But it basically said support for reparations is at like an all-time high right now amongst the American population. But only thing I just wanted to point out, Sam, was that kind of it's coming from all sides. And by the way, Megan McArdle works for the Washington Post too. Right. So that's kind of. How many people have a freaking job, Sam? I'm sorry, it's actually really ridiculous.
Well,
I'm sorry, guys, I'll jump. But my thing is, Sam, is just like, maybe you guys will talk about it, maybe you won't, but it's just very interesting to me that they're really trying to head this off at the pass. Black people need this, black people need that, but you don't need economic reparations. Well, and to your point, Sam, this is nothing new. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Right, it is nothing new, and I'll let you go. But personally, from just a strictly a political sense, I think we should set up a reconciliation committee. And, a legit one. I would frankly wait for a different president to appoint that committee or, a different Congress. But, and I think that's the way you come out of it. I mean, you do it as a process. And, to a certain extent, bills in which include funding for historically black universities, I don't think that's sufficient. But I do think it's necessary in the context of the way that you would construct a reparations bill. Injecting and creating access to capital in the African-American community is another way of doing it. Direct payments is one way of doing it as well. I mean, I think this is not a controversial idea. It certainly wasn't controversial back in the day, and we've just seen essentially the interest grow on this debt. Frankly. Take another call here. Calling from a 210 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? 210. 210. Hold on. 210. Where are you calling from?
Good afternoon, Sam. It's John from San Antonio.
John from San Antonio. What's on your mind, buddy?
Yeah, contrary to mainstream media reports, Bernie Sanders had some phenomenal results yesterday. The latest YouGov CBS News poll. For the first time, Bernie Sanders is leading in Nevada with 29% of the vote. Biden leads and had led in all 6 of the previous polls released there. Biden receives 27%, and Warren gets 18 in New Hampshire. Warren leads at 27, Biden with 26, Bernie at 25, which is an improvement of 5 points as a percentage, 5 points improvement from the front runner's lead. In Iowa, Biden leads with 29. Bernie's at 26, which is his highest percentage in Iowa all year. And YouGov polled in Super Tuesday states, but did not release individual results from those states. But they did release total delegate projections, and this is the third projection of the summer. And Bernie is closer than ever to Biden, and so is Warren. So there's a lot of talk 2 weeks ago about the Monmouth so-called outlier poll. But if you look at the states, which are obviously more important, Bernie has leads in Colorado and Oregon. It's super tight in California, Maine, Minnesota, Washington, Wisconsin, Indiana, New Jersey, and even Texas. Maybe not super tight in some of them, but tight. And I expect Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Massachusetts to get even closer. And so the only reason, Biden's up in national polls is he does have large leads in the South and some parts of the Midwest.
Yep.
So,
I can tell you that all the reporting is starting to reflect like this sense of concern within the Biden camp and a sense outside of the Biden camp. Now, everybody could be wrong. It's all conjecture, and maybe some measure of educated guessing. But everyone, it seems to believe that Biden's lead is incredibly shaky, and I think it's going to be interesting because here's the dynamic that I think is that I'm seeing in the couple of days before this Democratic debate. I think the Biden people are very worried about Warren, and I think they're worried about her because I think they know that she's probably going to come after Biden over the bankruptcy bill, or they think that she might. I would not be surprised if Bernie basically just stepped aside and just let all his policies do the talking. He doesn't, Warren and Biden have some, I think, genuine, at least professional acrimony. and I wouldn't be surprised if Bernie steps aside and, lets them fight head to head and does, to the extent that he's fighting, just do it on a policy grounds. And it's going to be really interesting to see because the Biden people are clearly worried. And these polls I would imagine, are just like reflecting what they've probably seen in private polling prior to this.
I think that there's a stark difference between the internet polls and the phone polls, and so Bernie does a lot better in the internet polls. So we'll see once things start happening. In less than 5 months now. So it'll be interesting to go from there. As far as some of the crosstabs that had the question, why did you consider a candidate? And they listed several individualized and some universal questions of the top 4 candidates. Bernie had 85% of the voters are considering supporting him because of his policy stances. Warren had 90%, Harris 76%. Biden only had 59%, and his highest totals were because of his time as vice president with Barack Obama, 87%. Yep. Also, in the North Carolina 9th District race, it's a toss-up race between Dan McCready, Democrat, and the Republican Dan Bishop. Unfortunately, McCready made a terrible decision to return money donated to him by Ilhan Omar, and so that just reinforces my belief that even in swing districts, moderates and conservatives should be primary. Now, I do hope he wins, and I'll be following it closely. I'm already looking at all the individual counties and everything to that extent. But in the bigger picture, we need to get more progressive people. And, even if it's a tough task, we need to keep, building up, getting our message out. And eventually, we can win districts like this. And so that's kind of my take on that. So we've talked about your theory about Republican gerrymandering district, and we've had slight disagreements about this. One example is that you keep bringing up is the Wisconsin State Assembly elections,
right,
which Democrats won 53% of the vote and Republicans won 64% of the seats.
Yeah.
But you've got to consider the context of that. There were 99 seats, up in the state assembly, and Republicans didn't run candidates in 30 seats, mostly in Milwaukee and Madison. And Democrats didn't run 8 seats in rural Wisconsin. So that's a total of 22% or 22 Republican seats that they didn't run a candidate for, cumulatively. And so, that's obviously over 20% of the races that they didn't run a candidate. So that really, skews the statistics and
in terms of the voting.
Makes the argument. Right. And so I'm not sure about that. I mean, actually, the North Carolina gerrymandering could actually be, even more extreme, the actual, U.S. House vote. So we'll see about this district because, we'll just like in the 2018 election, many people said that the Democrats can never win the House the way it's gerrymandered now. I mean, it's just impossible. Yet they won 41 seats, in 2018, picked up maybe 42, after Wednesday. So we'll see if how much gerrymandering can be overcome. I mean, I think it's great that they did make this decision, in North Carolina. And I hope they can pick up more seats, in 2020. But I'm not sure to the degree,
that it's going to make as much
there's going to
a
be
difference.
that much of a difference.
We'll
right.
see.
But I mean, tomorrow's going to be a big bellwether, though, to see what's going on. All right. Thank you, Sam.
Appreciate the call.
All right.
Yeah, debate is on Thursday. Calling from what the heck? Calling from a 847 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi. Whoa, my voice just went up. Hi, Sam. It's Josh from Chicago.
Josh from Chicago. Your voice is changing.
Hello, Josh. How's puberty coming
I'm
along?
going through puberty.
Yeah, I understand.
Congratulations on the
I'm going
drop.
through puberty now.
Been there. Did it.
Really, Samantha?
Yep.
First off, I want to make a tribute to the Kochs and say that I think Kirsten Gillibrand's problem is that she didn't run her campaign well or with passion. Just saying. More an opportunity to hear that sound drop again from our friend Wyatt Koch. I want to talk about the Green New Deal.
Okay.
I think the thing that was really impressive that Bernie did with the Green New Deal in putting it out there is I think one of the things that I think there was criticisms over AOC's Green New Deal is that it was more of a resolution than it was policy. And I think the thing that's really impressive is that, and a lot of candidates are talking about, quote unquote, I support a Green New Deal, is that Bernie has now defined what a Green New Deal actually is supposed to look like through policy. And I think this is very helpful, especially because he's starting to separate sort of a lot of these fake progressives or people who pretend to advocate for a Green New Deal with what a Green New Deal is actually supposed to look like. I think he's actually also, in a way, he's drawing, I don't think endorsements are that important in the long run, but I think he's also pulling AOC towards his side when he talks about policy, especially separating the policy differences between Bernie and Warren. To me, other candidates cannot now say they support a Green New Deal if they don't include what Bernie has put in his Green New Deal, which is also very detailed. And I know he doesn't get a lot of credit for being a policy person, but this is a very detailed and well thought out plan. This isn't just like 4 pages of something. This is very well thought out, very detailed, lots of different policy proposals, and very all encompassing, I think, especially from a climate justice perspective, and also also for labor, in terms of labor organizing and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, I think that's, I don't think it's very controversial to say, like, that's been the dynamic with this whole field. I mean, short of Biden and, and I guess John Delaney, but
he's still in.
Exactly. But the whole terms of the debate are really Bernie's policies are being used as a watershed, and everything is being measured against that. And, it is, I'm sure there are examples of dynamics like this, but not on the Democratic side. I think probably, something like, around like Reagan on some level, had the ability to sort of reorient the whole party in many respects. And Bernie has done that. And yeah, I agree with you. I think he's, the idea of like the Green New Deal being substantively even debated and considered as a benchmark 2 years ago, a year ago, 5 years ago. I mean, it's not, it would have never existed. Yeah, it's pretty exciting. It's going to be
also the international dimension that he put on the table too. That was another big critique of the lack of specificity and the lack of recognition that this is obviously going to need to be a global effort. You have a multi-billion-dollar fund to help transition developing countries. You have partnership with China and Russia on technological development, and the protocols from the environmental justice movement and the UN 1992 Protocol on Indigenous Peoples' Rights, all built around the foundation of a federal jobs guarantee. I mean, it's a next level. Obviously, I think between medical debt and single payer and everything, he has the best policy set. But this is, even for me as a fan, was surprising how extraordinary this bill was.
Appreciate the call, Josh.
Peace out, Josh.
Yeah, I like
Let's take one more call. Calling from a 765 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam. This is Lucas from Indiana.
Lucas from Indiana. What's on your mind, Lucas?
I will have 2 quick things for you. One is I live in a small town called Pendleton, middle class, lower class area, and everyone's here is about making $8 to $10 an hour, or they're making 20 plus. Pretty much is how the dynamic goes here. With the kind of impending economic crash coming, what would be the best way for people like me to try to prepare for it to survive? And then I have a toss to Michael after that.
Well, I don't know how severe, our next recession is going to be, obviously. I don't think it's going to be, what we experienced in 2008.
Have you heard Dean Baker's perspective on that at all?
What's that?
He's somebody who obviously understands that the structural problems in the economy in a really fundamental way, because he's left, progressive Keynesian, but I think he doesn't even think we're going to have a recession, if I understand him correctly.
Yeah, I mean,
the biggest takeaway is because there isn't an analogous thing to the housing market to burst like that.
Well,
that's I think his main argument.
I think it's possible we could get a technical recession, but we're not going to rival anything in 2007, 2008, because frankly, there hasn't been enough time to inflate whatever that balloon popping would be. I mean, we had a recession or near recession in the early aughts. and when the housing bubble was still just like starting to inflate. And so you can go through that. There doesn't seem to be an asset class that is so over leveraged that could create the type of financial meltdown that we had in 2008. And so, I mean, it's always good to be in cash. I mean, but you know, the only trouble that we'll have if we do have a recession is that the tools that they normally use, spending and monetary policy and like loosening the money supply, there's not a lot of room on the loosening money supply side because our interest rates are so low as it is. And on the spending side, if a Democrat wins in particular, the Republicans are going to pretend like the deficit and debt is out of control and we need to not spend. I wish I had a better answer for you, but that's
fine. That helps a bit.
Save money. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't.
And then
don't buy stuff on credit.
Then
don't.
No. I'd avoid credit if I can.
If somebody like, say, Bill O'Reilly is endorsing an investment club, steer clear of that.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. I started into full-blown political learning kind of by listening to Kyle Kalinske at first in 2016. And I listen to this show more now, I think, but I still love Kyle. He does some good work.
Right.
He likes you-know-who a little bit too much.
Right.
Demi Jor.
Okay.
But he's just announced that he's going to Politicon again this year and that he'll be on Joe Rogan again afterwards. Is there any chance you'd be able to get him on either here or TMBS afterwards to talk about his experiences there?
Well, I have him on TMBS from time to time. In fact, we're going to be doing a TMBS last Tuesday of this month. But yeah, very unlikely that I'll have a specific debrief like that because I just don't, to be honest, I don't find that sort of thing to be particularly interesting. But I like having conversations with Kyle. I like Kyle. We'll do more.
I've been meaning to have him on a Friday for probably 2 or 3 years, but as there's I've got a list of like half a dozen people like that I always forget to do. But someday we'll have him on. Again, like Politicon. I'm not. If I had the opportunity to debate someone who I really wanted to debate, I would go. But I'm not
planning to currently.
No, Dan Bongino just doesn't do it for me, folks. I mean, I would if I didn't have to travel. You know what I mean? But like, I don't. When I look at the landscape, I don't see Dan Bongino as like a threat to sort of stealing the hearts and minds of young people, frankly. But appreciate the call.
I don't even care about those guys. It really just honestly doesn't matter.
We really don't have any clips of Tulsi and Dave Rubin. I mean, I'm not really.
I haven't watched it yet.
Okay, we're gonna watch this thing. All right, let's. Let's do some Pam Anderson on The View. Now, Pam Anderson is an interesting figure. There's a lot of things that she has to say on Twitter and whatnot that I find I'm in total agreement. Others less so. There's been some weird, I heard some like peripheral talk about like, sort of her disposition on I don't know, on Jews or I don't know exactly what. I didn't
my read from everything I've seen of her, and I don't follow her that closely, but I read a really good interview with her in the Jacobin. This is somebody who's actually super on top of it.
She's totally
like not
on
just
top.
occasionally the right take. She's on top of it, and I agree. With the parts of her support of WikiLeaks and Assange, I agree with, frankly. But so my read would be that she is somebody who has criticized the policies of Israel, and sometimes that
I don't know. No, I'm looking at.
Is it actually a real thing?
It looks like she honeymooned in Israel, and there's pictures of her with Shmuley Boteach, and I forget what the Power Rangers guy.
Odd. That's odd.
Who knows? I don't know.
Yeah, I
wouldn't fit with her.
There's some weirdness there,
ethos.
but I am not as much of a fan of Julian Assange as she is, but I think the things that he's been indicted for is reprehensible, and the publishing of the materials that Chelsea Manning got were massive. In fact, I was on every week on MSNBC at that time in the early 2000, I think, teens or 11s or whatever it was. And I remember, every day someone would say, these are not important, this is not important information. We didn't need this information. And it's endangering the lives of people. Well, it endangered no one. There wasn't a single accusation, even vague one.
Certainly revealed a lot of endangering that we did.
Yes, without a doubt. But there wasn't a single accusation that any sensitive asset, person, system was in any way endangered, A. B, the idea that it didn't tell us anything new was absurd because literally every day there would be multiple stories in various publications. New York Times, the Washington Post, the Guardian, Times of London, whatever it is, Dare Stern, based upon the cables that were released. So clearly newsworthy. The mainstream media dined on this for years. For years. And I'm talking about that original dump, which is what Julian Assange is being charged with. And so in that regard, Pam Anderson is talking the truth, and then to see her run into Meghan McCain, who, undoubtedly
I'm sorry, you mean John McCain's daughter? I'm not totally clear who that is.
Whatever, her town hall husband, talking points gave her. This is what she showed up with.
Seth Meyers, you're a Jew pansy talking point?
Right.
You were visiting him. He was allegedly kicked out of the Ecuadorian embassy because he was defecating everywhere and creating methods.
No, well, that's a smear campaign. That's not true.
There was video of things that happened. I don't.
What would you do if you were locked in a room for
really quick
6 years?
Well, I wouldn't be a cyber terrorist, which he is. He hacked information. His leaks included classified documents that put our national security at risk, our military,
you know who
and the lives of spies and diplomats
is the military. How many people have the American government killed innocently, and how many has WikiLeaks?
So you think the military is putting the government at risk?
The military has put many innocent lives at risk.
Oh, calm down, sir. For real, I'm actually genuinely curious about your relationship with him.
War crimes need to be punished, and they haven't. The war crimes that he's exposed, no one's done anything about it, but they put him in jail to shut him up.
Are you talking about the 210 video of the helicopter fire killing civilians in Iraq?
Yeah, well, that's one thing, but there's so many other things that he's exposed, and it's not just America. He's exposed Russia. He's exposed all sorts of different countries.
Yeah, I mean, there's Meghan McCain she's just up there. Honestly, they could just do a ticker tape. Literally just type in the talking points and just, play it on a scroll so that she doesn't have to, undermine her own points by having such an attitude about it. Honestly, it makes for better TV. But the reality is that there is no evidence. And she would cite it. She would say, as in the CIA Inspector General report, or as in the Senate Select Committee's Special Security report. No, there is no report. And maybe the guy defecated all through this embassy. Maybe he didn't. But guess what? That's not why you charge someone with espionage.
I do have to say, too, in addition to that, just the really specifics one of the stuff coming out of Ecuador, it's worth noting that this Ecuadorian government of Lenin Moreno has shifted to the extreme far right, even though he was elected on a center-left platform. And there are at least one or two Ecuadorian embassy employees who basically are saying what she's saying, which is that this is a misrepresentation of his conduct there. And, he didn't do stuff like that. But regardless, it doesn't matter. Well, the thing that actually does matter is that it's so amazing and unusual to hear somebody just sort of state that civilian casualties matter on a national television broadcast.
Right. I mean, that is the broader point. I just think it's extremely dangerous from a press standpoint to be pursuing him in this way. I mean, if you want to arrest him for defecating in the Ecuadorian embassy, maybe you can bring him some type of like public indecency charge. But I don't, and let him go on trial for that. But this other stuff is just sort of like talking point BS.
And I remember reading that indictment. It's terrifying. I mean, the hack charge, there is one thing that is like, maybe I'll help you find access to a password, which he does not achieve. That's in the document. And everything else that's in the document is stuff that if you follow any good investigative reporter like Ken Klippenstein, like hit me on WhatsApp, share this on Dropbox.
Right.
That's what the indictment is.
Right.
It's petrifying.
Exactly. It is the idea that they have a Dropbox, a secure Dropbox on their website. Here is Meghan McCain asking, well, what would you tell the imaginary spies who were endangered by these leaks?
Emails. I mean, the question I have though is like, what would you say to? I know, but that doesn't mean everything should be. The question I have though is like spies that go out and put their lives at risk, like Congressman Will Hurd, who we were just talking about, who's dedicated decades of his life to helping fight terrorism. It's classified information, I believe, is classified for a reason. I do have some faith in the U.S. government, although as a conservative, I have less faith normally than liberals do. So, what would you say to the spies who are putting themselves at risk for our national security with your relationship with him?
Well, I don't think there's nothing proven that he's actually put anybody at risk. They've gone through this over and over again, and I think that people like Edward Snowden, Chelsea Manning are heroes, and Julian Assange is a publisher.
Putin also thinks that.
What did she say? Putin also thinks that?
Yes. Oh, God. The Putin insult really is the first refuge of a moron.
I looked into his eyes. Saw he was a man of integrity.
Remember, that's what I think McCain and Biden both have said things that are literally like, I looked in his eyes and I saw nothing but
a dead shark.
I saw Lucifer.
That is not the most important of that clip, but that whole I trust the government to keep important, like what's classified is meant to be classified.
Well, if anything, the entire leak from Chelsea Manning is evidence that stuff is overclassified. That, I mean, if I was going to make an academic argument about the overclassification in this country, that would be Exhibit A. There'd be a couple other exhibits, but basically it was, do not embarrass us. This is honestly using the classification system for basically for a high school mentality. Right? Like, we can't be seen as being human or weak, or we don't want to tell everybody that we didn't use the best china for, to see the ambassador of blankety blank. I mean, the news value of this information was proven by how many, literally hundreds of stories it generated.
Or that we're terrorizing the Haitian government to not raise minimum wage.
Right.
Right? Like, these are some really substantive things too. But I also just love the juxtaposition though of like, I'm a conservative, so I have some distrust for the government. And what I mean by that is when it comes to like pretty transparently making sure that like the water is drinkable, I'm not into that. What I'm into is secretive global killing programs.
Right.
That's the part.
Right.
That I'm going to give them more deference.
I don't want the government to mess with my light bulbs, but it's okay for them to go and kill world leaders as they determine.
They can kill people without warrants across the globe and not take account of civilian casualties. But if they tell me about what I can dump in my backyard, that we're going to run into some problem.
Really crossing the... All right, head to the IM's Janeway. Every billionaire is a potential Bond villain. Indeed. Secret identity politics. Thank you for mentioning light bulbs. After Laura Ingram's weird hamburger art, I had been starting to think the light bulb issue was a fascist thing from context clues, so thanks for confirming that. Market-based manhood. Sam, I find it remarkable that the Kochs are so patient and so focused on the future, yet so attracted to fossil fuels. You'd think that poisoning the planet for short-term gain would be the sole strategy of public companies thinking in terms of quarters and not like the Koch industries in it for the long run and long term. Well, I mean, look, the fact of the matter is long term is really more of like a 5 or 10 year horizon. And they are probably correct to say that if our family lineage has $160 billion that it controls, we'll still win during a climate disaster. Sean from NorCal. If you think it's sick mind and not a gun that kills people, give one crazy guy a gun and a handful of bullets and another crazy guy just a handful of bullets and see who does more damage. Banished for cuck jokes 420. Like Michael, I too intentionally bad at jobs I don't want to do. That's why alphas dutifully... Okay. Pajama Boy.
I don't even understand, but it sounds good.
Alphas dutifully plow. Pajama Boy. So I still hate watch Bill Maher, but man, oh man, is it getting worse by the week. Maher seems to always defend guys like Franken and Biden being handsy, and it makes you wonder if he's concerned about something. I used to like it more when he had better guests, but lately they have been abysmal. Is the recent talk of Clinton helping out Warren political suicide for Warren? And if it does happen and she drops out, would she endorse Bernie? Well, first off, second question last. I imagine she would endorse Bernie. It would be shocking if she didn't, frankly, if she dropped out. I don't know. I think I would imagine the story about Warren helping out or Clinton helping out Warren, I imagine is at least founded in some reality. I mean, part of what Warren's sales pitch is that she works the inside game as well. So I would be surprised if she wasn't, it's not like Hillary Clinton is going to come back and do anything, but it is also of concern, when there are areas that Warren is soft on, that Hillary Clinton is bad on as well. If they were meeting about, like how, I've come around on the bankruptcy bill, Elizabeth, how could they could have made that better? Or, I liked one aspect of your debt-free college thing and I'm going to incorporate, if these are the things they were talking about, but when you see a clip like this, Emma Vigeland was down in, where's she in Houston?
I think in
New Hampshire. Covering the early primary state. And here she is. I think she's up in Concord, New Hampshire. This is the Democratic Convention in Concord. And she got a question that she asked Elizabeth Warren. And I have to say that, I think it's quite clear Elizabeth Warren's worst attributes are in regard to foreign policy. And the military in this does not in any way assuage those concerns. Here it is.
I asked Senator Elizabeth Warren about her record when it comes to the military budget and foreign policy, which some from the left have criticized her on, I think with legitimate cause. And this was her answer. You have focused a lot on progressive domestic policy. You also voted for a military budget increase in 2017. How does that square with your progressive politics when we're talking about foreign policy?
If the question is, do I think we should cut the military budget, the answer is yes. And I'm now on the Senate Armed Services Committee. I've had this fight over and over. But there's another part to it, too. We need to stop the control over our defense budget that's exercised by the giant defense industry. As you know, we now have a Secretary of Defense who spent 7 years as head lobbyist for Raytheon. I asked for some simple conflict of interest rules that he would abide by. For example, not to make decisions that involve Raytheon and Raytheon's bottom line. And he refused. The Republicans confirmed him anyway. But this is what corruption is all about. Putting lobbyists in charge of our government agencies, a lobbyist, former lobbyist in charge of the Environmental Protection Agency. This is the heart of corruption. And the moment has come to call it out and to fight back. That's what being in this room was all about.
So she starts by saying, if the question is, do I want a smaller military budget? The answer is yes. And that's great. I'm in favor of that. The question was, when you were in a position to reflect that desire by your vote, why didn't you vote that way? Now, I mean, I suppose she could have come up with an answer, well, we had to vote for that because we had other set of priorities that we wanted to pass or whatnot. But the way in which she avoids this question is problematic. It's problematic. I mean, at one point, you cannot decry the corruption that exists there and then vote for the product of that corruption. I mean, that's the point, right? Like, it's not just that there's corruption and we're worried that we're sending our boys and girls out to war with, faulty body armor, which in some instances we do, and is a problem. But it's basically a trough, an ever-expanding trough where interests that don't really help anybody except for themselves keeps feeding at. And I don't understand how you can vote for the continuation of the expansion and the feeding at that trough and then say, I'm going to stop the things that are driving that. Well, it ends, all of the problems you have just listed ends with senators voting to increase the budget.
And she's voted.
That seems to be a choke point.
Every single increase including there was one budget under Trump where they actually gave them more than was requested. And I want to give people, there was a really good piece that was written back in 2015 called Warren Takes Care of Defense Business Back Home. And it actually goes especially into her direct relationship with Raytheon, which is a major, it's a massive industry in Massachusetts, but it's a huge contradiction and it's structural to her career, which is why she, just literally didn't answer the question. She didn't even say, look, I voted the wrong way.
Right, that's what I just said.
I've had, like you said, I've had parochial interests, but now there's something else I'm trying to do. She just did the classic kind of disingenuous hard pivot.
Hey, speaking of disingenuous hard pivot, Mark Sanford was on Morning Joe. I just read a really amusing piece about how Mark Halperin apparently got into a fight with Phil Griffin over at MSNBC because the Morning Joe people wanted to have a some type of like relaunch of Mark Halperin's career on sort of like a internet channel, and he said no. Griffin said no, and then Mark Halperin was like, "You're the worst. I don't mind being judged by perfect people. I'll let perfect people judge me," says Mark Halperin. How about you just let people who didn't essentially, show off their erection to people that work for them? How about they judge you? How about sort of like just basic human decency with the people you work for and some measure of respect and not a decision that you don't have to respect somebody because they're a woman? How about you let those people judge you? Unbelievable. There were so many aspects of that story that I really appreciated. But here is another, and this is, look, this is not the same thing. This is not the same thing as rehabilitating the career of a serial sexual harasser. But the dynamic is similar because what you're doing is you're just creating a bunch of BS to promote a perspective that is also full of BS. And you're ostensibly doing it, for a good reason. What I'm talking about is Mark Sanford announcing his primary run against Donald Trump on Morning Joe, as if the problem was not the Republican Party. And here's Mark Sanford talking about what he's going to run on, which is also just absurd. It's such a lie. It's unbelievable. Here it is.
When we got to Congress, everybody was saying we could never balance the budget. We balanced the budget for the first time in a generation. We balanced it 4 years in a row for the first time in a century. We passed welfare reform. We cut taxes. We actually reformed Medicare, extended its life by 7 years by making some difficult choices. That's what I always thought conservatives did. That's what I always thought the Republican Party stood for. And yet you're running against a Republican president who's given us the biggest deficits ever, certainly in an expansive economy, the biggest federal debt ever, the biggest spending budget ever, a budget that even Rand Paul said a couple of months ago was the biggest boondoggle in the history of the republic. And because he's a protectionist, because he doesn't believe in free markets, free trade, he's got this $16 billion socialist scheme to pay off the biggest agricultural interests, industrial interests in America. Like, how do you run against a guy like that when 75-80% of Republicans support that? The party has changed, Mark. It's changed.
I would say this. That's the central premise of the campaign. The thousands of conversations that I had over 25 years, both as 2 terms in the governorship and 12 years in the House of Representatives, the thousands of conversations I had with folks, whether at the small business level where they were trying to make it, or whether you talk to folks around the kitchen counter and they're talking about the struggle they had with finances. I believe that those people have not disappeared. I think that they have been talked to. They haven't been appealed to. But I don't think they've disappeared. Now, if I'm wrong on that, my campaign will be short-lived. But if I'm right, I think that this campaign will have legs.
Short-lived.
Excuse me. Not only will it be short-lived, the delusion involved in this conversation is stunning. And it's if I give them credit for being deluded, I am literally giving them credit. I'm giving them credit for not completely disingenuously lying to everyone who was in earshot of what they were saying. There may be thousands of people that Mark Sanford has seen on the Appalachian Trail, as it were, and has talked to him about the deficit. But when you talk about conservatives and the deficit and debt, and I don't have the issues with deficits and debts that they do, but I don't pretend that I do. Ronald Reagan increased the debt by 186%. It was the third largest increase. The other two, I should say, this biggest in terms of percentage wise, was during the Great Depression, because obviously revenues died, and during Woodrow Wilson's presidency, having to pay for World War I. So in peacetime, to the extent that we can say that, or non-depression eras, Ronald Reagan. Coming in at fourth, George W. Bush. Then Barack Obama, who came in under a massive recession again, where revenues were completely cut. Conservatives don't care any more about the deficit or debt, maybe less than others, until it becomes a means in which to prevent the government from inhibiting in any way their malfeasance, or for providing for people who don't vote for them. And I will remind you, the people who vote for the Republican Party, 9 out of 10 times, you can put them behind a curtain, I can guess what race they are. 9 out of 10
I thought you
times.
were going in a different direction with that one.
What's that?
Nothing. Curtain.
Sheets. Well, yeah, there you go. It's just unbelievable what a sack of horse manure is involved in all of that they're pretending there.
Also, like the phrase, I've had 1,000 conversations on the deficit. I don't know what that supports other than you've wasted a lot of time.
Right, indeed.
The idea that people are sitting around their kitchen tables talking about the deficit as the means to help them out of their economic anxiety is just insane.
It's not true.
All right, there's 2 more clips here I want to get to before we go. And folks, I'm sorry, we're not going to have time for any more calls. Well, maybe I'll do that quickie thing. Don't anybody else call, and I'll go through. Everybody will get 30 seconds. Quickie. We'll hold the ad for later. I want to play this because this is pretty stunning. It's just a clip from a football game in Alabama. It's a teen, a high school football team. And they're at Center Point High School. I don't know where in Alabama, Jefferson County, I guess. And they're playing. And And then all of a sudden, apparently, there's the sound of gunfire. And this happens. Here. Hold on one second.
All right, Scott. Hey, thank you so much. You know, the Drummond Company is a proud sponsor of... Okay, there's something going on.
Yeah, something's going on in the field. Basically, what happens is they hear gunshots. They're celebrating towards the end of the game. And then all the players on the field literally lie down on the ground, cowering in fear for their lives. Now, it just turns out that I guess somebody was hunting in the neighborhood and the gun goes off. If you live in a rural area, you're used to that sound. I certainly have in the past. You get used to it. You hear gunshots all the time. At first, it scares you, and then it doesn't. These guys, I'm sure, they're comfortable hearing gunshots when they're at their homes or out, but this is the society we live in now, where the first assumption is, oh my God, there's a sniper who's shooting everybody in the football stadium. Get all these kids down on the ground. So what do you think they're going to be talking about? The game they just won and they were celebrating? Or, oh my God, yeah, that's right. At any time, we could be shot at because of our gun laws in this country. You don't think this implicates the psyche of people? Like the psyche of a nation? Oh, yeah. I mean, perfectly reasonable to assume that there's somebody shooting a sniper. Everybody down.
It's the price of freedom.
It's the price of freedom, folks. Yeah, that is a very, very narrow definition of freedom.
I'm not feeling free with that.
We've just got so much more free as the AR-15's gotten more popular.
So much more free.
You will not take that away from me.
All right.
I'm tired of this virtue signaling. Look at all these players virtue signaling.
Oh, so they're on the ground carrying for their
30
life. That's
seconds.
virtue signaling. I'm sorry.
30 seconds for everybody. Here we go. Calling from a 760 area code. Who's this? Where you calling from?
Hey there, this is Kentucky Fried Comrade from California.
You got 30 seconds. Go.
AB 5 in California, they're going to reclassify independent contractors as actual workers. Rideshare companies are pissed off. And Daryl Issa is back and trying to run against Amar Kampa in California 50 disaster. There you go.
F. Issa. Appreciate it.
What's the matter? No new car deals?
Calling from a 607 area code. I'm just doing people. If you've been on the phone for more than an hour, I'm picking you up. Otherwise, hang up now. All right, calling from a 607 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? You got 30 seconds. Go. Not very well done. Oh. Calling from a 715 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? 715.
Hi, this is Yufio again. From northern Wisconsin.
Okay, you got 30 seconds. Go.
A quick question. I did have a lot more, but I was wondering why you guys don't cover the utter nonsense sputtered by Stefan Molyneux enough.
Well, I used to, and perhaps maybe we'll dive back into that. But yes, he's a lunatic.
He's marginalized, right?
He's pretty marginalized, but I appreciate the call. Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
But it's true. He's we've
just interviewed the Brazil's environment minister to explain what's really happening in the Amazon, though. I will say.
Right. Okay.
Calling from a 760 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam, this is Don from Portland, Oregon.
Don, 30 seconds, go.
To say that, Dom like Dominic. Anyway, calling to say we need to have a powerful movement for rent control nationally, because your call earlier where you talked about the housing bubble, it's real in Portland. We're 50% higher than we were at the height of 2008.
Wow.
There's stats locally about that. So I'm a tenant organizer. Just want to say, if you are in a city with a tenant union, join it because it's important and you may need it in a couple years.
Thanks for the call.
Thanks.
Tenant unions, folks. Calling from 409 area code. 409. Who's this? Where you calling from?
Sam, this is Mr. Toro from Texas.
And what's on your mind? You got 30 seconds.
Hey, Sam, well, I applaud your mission to make sure that the people are aware of Mr. Rubin's absurd grift. Apparently, we have a lot more work to do because a young presidential candidate for the United States went on that show and proceeded to allow every dishonest right-wing claim from Rubin with very little pushback. I think I counted she pushed back once. It's obvious what this guy's shtick is. He's the level-headed centrist, but someone Tulsi's age should have known better and be more aware of the online left. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you. Yeah, we're going to go dig into that interview. Calling from a 503 area code. Who's this? Where you calling from? Got 30 seconds.
Hey, this is Joe in LA. How you guys doing?
Good. Joe, you got 30.
Okay. I just wanted to let everyone know about the soon-to-be-released Dennis Prager movie, No Safe Spaces, featuring all-star comedian Adam Carolla. Sure to be a huge hit. I encourage everyone to Google the poster because Prager's face looks like he's in the middle of taking a huge dump. He's arguing currently with the MPAA over the rating of his movie because the First Amendment character gets violently shot, which is supposed to symbolize the left's attacks on free speech.
Oh, my God.
And, I just wanted to express my sympathy to the parents. Find another documentary featuring a freakish propagandist and an over-the-hill comedian talking about the lack of free speech on campus.
We should put
Anyways,
that one.
Left is best, bend the knee, Luba Livre, and stop being a pederast, Sam.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Very strong call, Joe. Very strong.
We may have to do that one, too.
Oh,
we got to put
that is
two
a horrifying
movies.
picture. Oh, my God. He's right about
Calling from
that.
a 266 area code. Who's this? Where you calling from? You got 30 seconds. Go.
Hey, Sam.
Hi. Wait, who's this? Where you calling from?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, who's this?
Oh, sorry. This is Peter. I'm in New Zealand, so there might be a little bit of a delay. I apologize for that.
It's okay.
Kind of been on since that. I thought I actually missed the call chance because that Ben Shapiro clip was on earlier, and I can't stand that guy's voice at all.
I understand.
Really quick. Sounds like a vibrator that can enunciate. Ivanka Trump just came back, or she's, I believe she's in South America currently, and they just announced $1 billion deal for female entrepreneurs out there. Fine, that's great. Love female entrepreneurs. The issue I have with that is Citibank is putting in $500 million for this. And after years and years of money laundering claims and major issues down in South America, Latin America, I'm just kind of concerned that there's no oversight for this whatsoever. So I'm just calling to maybe talk about that a little bit, but might not for 30 seconds. But thanks for
all right, interesting.
chat anyway.
We'll look into that. Appreciate it. Thanks. All right, we got 3 more callers with 30 seconds. Calling from a 385 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Sam, it's Josh from Salt Lake City, Utah. Hey, just wanted to call in, and unfortunately we're not going to be able to get into it, obviously, but I wanted to ask you, I'm a libertarian, wanted to ask you why you want businesses to subsidize an individual's bad choices with the minimum wage, but doesn't sound like we're going to be able to talk about
Let me
that.
turn off the timer. I would love to waste some time right now.
Call back.
No.
Call back tomorrow, and I will find your area code and put you up in front.
You promise?
I promise.
Oh, dude, he promises.
Believe me.
Incidentally, I'm
this is
sick.
the most. This is the most
I have a
restraint I've ever
migraine
practiced
that's
in my
going to
life.
miraculously disappear before my show tomorrow night. So enjoy yourselves tomorrow, guys.
Appreciate the call.
Okay.
All right, call back.
All right, sounds good.
All right, make a note of that.
You'll have the whole
everybody.
second half to yourself,
Yeah,
buddy.
exactly. Calling from a
Short and
314 area
soundless.
code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? You got 30 seconds.
This is Jennifer calling from St. Louis.
Jennifer from St. Louis. You got 30 seconds. Go.
Okay, I got 3 things. Sam, you and I are a member of the same club in that we were both born 3 weeks late.
Okay. Beautiful.
And I've never heard of anybody else, never met anybody in my life that can say that. So I think that's kind of weird.
Yeah, it's pretty rare.
Second thing, I sent an email a couple of weeks ago, before vacation, I need a mailing address because I have a little present that I need to send in for Michael.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll give you Michael's address, and then.
I don't want to. Don't dox him. Shit, dude. Sorry.
That's all right.
But
I feel comfortable with that. What's the third thing?
And then Third thing is just kind of a general big picture observation. Like, if we on the left think that middle America, rural America, quote unquote real Americans are upset about letting go of their guns, we're going to be really, really amazed by the fight they put up when we tell them they have to give up their trucks.
Yeah.
Because I live...
EV, they've already got an electric F-150. Don't worry. It'll be fine. They can get, we can get
real men do not drive electric.
I got news for you. They're going to develop.
Trust me, it's nothing Sam would know anything about.
I've already invested in third-party aftermarket coal blow and smoke devices that you can put onto your electric vehicle, so it'll sound like it's actually. And they'll come up with big
it's
black
not about
billowing.
the sound, bro. It's the smoke.
Exactly.
That's what I'm saying.
It's the smoke.
That's what I'm saying.
She gets it. You never will, Samantha. It doesn't matter if you read Handyman Magazine.
I appreciate the call. I had an electric train set that you could just put a little pill in the thing and it would get blow smoke. We'll develop that.
Car companies will come up with something to say about electric engines, like hyper energized. Yeah, and then guys will be all over it.
Boom, boom. We put in a new. It'll be like one of those like things that we had on our bicycles, where you could actually put on new handlebars that make it sound like a motorcycle, and all these big macho guys will be able to go vroom vroom on their car.
This isn't an electric 150. This is it has lasers in the engine.
Yeah, we got it. All right, calling from a 478 area code. You are the final call of the day, sir. Or lady.
Fantastic. How you doing, Sam? This is Jeff in Georgia.
Jeff in Georgia, you got 30 seconds, buddy.
Fantastic. That's all I need, man. Yeah, fertilizers came up on the show earlier. Yes, I very much enjoy it. And folks may not be aware that about 9 out of every 10 beaches in the Gulf of Mexico are closed, been closed since July because of toxic algae bloom. A lot of the water that gets released into the Gulf of Mexico has got two qualities to it. One is full of nitrogen for fertilizers. Two, it's fresh water, so the water is less salty now. Thousands of people are losing their livelihood, and if you think the federal government under the Republican administration got anything they're going to do about that, you are damn mistaken. We need more social society. Everybody get out there and work for Bernie. Hoo-ah!
There you go. Jeff from Georgia with the final call of the day, folks. See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bulb, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I get somewhere the choice was made, for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive.